Saida, is it possible for you to text me the link? Someone wanted me to text it to them, but I'm not sure how to move it from the computer to the text.
Yes, I'll send you a text.
Thank you. I don't have their email. I just have a text number. And I'm just going to mute myself for a second. Can you unmute me in a minute, please?
Sure. Okay.
I just need to talk to someone for a second. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And Craig is here as well. Craig, you should be able to unmute.
Hi, Craig.
Good evening.
Just let me know when you want me to do the spiel at the beginning. We're already recording and
You could do that and we'll just wait another couple minutes, 2-3 minutes. What do you think, Craig?
Yeah, let's do that.
okay, sounds good. Good evening, everyone. A few notes for you, particularly if this is your first meeting with us. You'll notice that you are muted and unable to mute yourself. After each presentation, members of the the co-chairs may call on members of the public who wish to speak. You can ask to be recognized by raising your virtual hand, and you can do that by going to the reactions button at the bottom of your screen and selecting raise hand. It's important not to raise your physical hands or wave at the screen because we may not be able to see you among the participants. If you are on a phone, you can raise your hand by pressing *9 and *6 to unmute. Once you're recognized by a co-chair, I'll unmute you and you may be prompted to confirm unmuting on your device. If you are using an older version of Zoom, you can access the raise hand feature by clicking the participants button on the menu at the bottom of your screen and selecting raise hand. The chat function is available for technical support only, not to ask questions of the co-chairs. You can send me a chat if you're having any trouble and I can walk you through any issues you may be having. That's it.
Thank you.
I'm wondering if we should start. I'm not sure based on the numbers we have now if we're going to be getting people rolling in or if people are just not able to attend or people didn't, since it wasn't in our monthly part of the monthly calendar notice, whether people just didn't know about the meeting.
I don't know. You know, it's 6:33. We got a few more people in the last few minutes. We could start. Someone already has their hand raised, but I don't know who that is. If the person is raising their hand, I don't even know if it's possible here because it's not, well, why don't we call on them and just see what the topic is? And we could, if necessary, just ask them to wait and you could talk about the updates and what you have on for your slide series.
Okay,
If it helps, I can see that this person is Evelyn David.
okay, so she knows.
She knows the routine.
Yes.
Evelyn, do you just have an introductory comment because we're not yet ready for the agenda items?
I can unmute her and
Thanks, Ada.
sure.
Hi, no, you just weren't, it went completely silent, totally dead. So I couldn't hear anything. I was just like getting worried that the whole thing had gone off or something.
No,
Anyway.
we were just giving people a few minutes to join.
Oh, okay. All right. So I'll go back to being muted and I will listen and do
Thank
my
you.
thing. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you
Yeah.
very much. Thank you.
Okay.
All right. Okay. Yeah.
All right, very good. So I'm guessing we can start. You think so, Alita?
I do.
All right. Well, I'll start and say good evening, everyone. Happy holidays. Happy Hanukkah to everyone who's celebrating now. Merry Christmas. Happy Kwanzaa to anyone who may be celebrating over the next few days. I'm not going to wish everyone a happy Festivus because I don't want tonight to turn into an airing of grievances, but we'll see how that goes. I'm Craig Later.
It's already an arena of grievances. We don't need to add more, but I'm sorry, and I cut you off, Craig.
No, it's okay. I'm Craig Later. I'm the co-chair along with Alita Camp.
Hi, everyone. And I second and echo Craig's good wishes, and also for a happy, successful, very healthy, prosperous new year. And for those who didn't have such a great year, a better year, or maybe for everyone, a better year. Anyway, go ahead, Craig. We don't want to waste everyone's time with this.
We could always hope for better.
True that.
So I guess first we'll start with updates. Since the last meeting, I was rummaging through news reports and such and looking to see if there are any official happenings. And I haven't seen anything since the last time we met in terms of anything in an official capacity. So no news from the MTA, nothing of note. Alita, did you come across anything?
No, I haven't. Just that there are a lot of changes in the city and always raising questions about the application and implications of congestion pricing, but nothing specific on that.
Okay, so let's, I see Mohit has his hand up. I don't know if Mohit has any news.
Yeah, something I saw today. The city's released, the city and the state have released a report called the New New York. And it's like a 150-page report, tons of policies for what sounds like kind of the governor's second term and the mayor's term here. And number 25 on the list is they use the word firmly, to firmly support congestion pricing.
Interesting. I had seen that report had come out. I had read about it. I didn't realize that there was any reference to it, but I guess in a sense that is the status quo.
Yeah, it's a status quo, but I think they've reiterated what, I guess what we all knew. The city and the state are both, still very supportive of this.
But that's good to know. So thank you
Yep.
for that. Okay, so then with that, I guess we'll move on to our next topic. The two topics we are hoping to address today and continuing to try to hit on different focus areas. So the first one we're going to do is talk about potential policy recommendations to city and state agencies regarding matters pertaining to congestion pricing's impact on Community District 8 near the toll zone boundary. So we're talking about between 59th and 66th Streets primarily. And I try to once again piece together the information that we had available that I was able to get from the environmental assessment to just frame this. And I promise you, I'm not going to go into an in-depth presentation here, but Saeed, if you don't mind just putting on the screen the slideshow that I put together, and I'll just walk through it and then try to just highlight what some of the specific findings in regards to the so-called boundary zone were, and then we can figure out how we may want to go about tackling it if we feel like we wish to. All right, so I guess we can jump ahead 2 screens or 2 slides. All right, so I think probably most people here are just familiar with the map, and again, this map just denotes the area where the congestion pricing toll zone is located. And if you go to the next slide, I just point out that there was always some question. The language within the legislation, which again was the budget law passed in April 2019, spoke about congestion pricing, the toll boundary being inclusive of 60th Street. So in terms of operational details that would affect our community district, one of the things that stuck out most to me was that it clearly states that all traffic using the northern upper roadway of the Queensboro Bridge to access Manhattan north of 60th Street would not be subject to central business district tolling, at least as based off of the modeling that they had used to prepare the environmental assessment. But besides those inbound upper roadway exits, everything else going to and from the bridge will have the toll infrastructure. So that means when we talk about detection points on ramps, basically we're talking about the overhead gantries and cameras that are going to be able to record easy passes and take photos of license plates to be able to toll. All right, next slide, please. And then the environmental impact talked about traffic impacts, and it, according to the environmental assessment, and of course, I always like to say the environmental assessment is done in a very specific procedural manner. There's a methodology that's in place. So when we talk about findings on it, we're talking about findings as it relates to potential significant impacts. So when they say no significant impacts, that's not necessarily suggestive of no impacts, and people may wish to question that if or disagree with that or ask questions, but I'm just reporting what it's stating here in terms of its findings. So what they say here is that the crossing credits, so when I talk about credits, this is if you were to pay a toll at another bridge or tunnel, and then you would be in theory charged for entering the central business district, you'd receive some form of credit so that you wouldn't be charged twice, or that the cost of the toll of a bridge would essentially count towards your congestion fee for that day. And the EA talked about how the crossing credits increase the attractiveness of the East River facilities run by the MTA, by the Triborough Bridge Tunnel Authority, compared to the Queensboro Bridge, and that would divert crossings destined for Manhattan off of the Queensboro Bridge. So what they're essentially saying is that the tolling, the operations of the tolling would essentially result in traffic being diverted to reduce the amount of vehicles crossing over the Queensboro Bridge. So under the central business district tolling alternative, meaning congestion pricing, they also say that the FDR Drive would experience a net decline in traffic at 60th Street. So that's what it says in terms of traffic impacts that could impact the low 60s. Next slide, please.
Wait. Could you go back for a second, if you don't mind my interrupting?
Yeah.
Because I'm unclear about something in there, which is the last paragraph, the red one, which says that the FDR Drive would experience a net decline at 60th Street and along the segment between 23rd and East 60th Street. So what do you think they think will happen when we get north of 60th Street?
They didn't say anything on there. I think they were only looking at, I don't recall if they were looking at just below 60th Street or not, or if the implication was whether there would be no change or something else north of 60th Street, but I'd have to go back and check, and I apologize that I don't remember.
No, that's okay. It's just that there are all kinds of scenarios people are imagining that will result in different traffic patterns, such as using either the Triborough or running up through Queens and using the Bronx bridges. And I think nobody knows. So I was wondering what they were thinking, but we don't know. So let's just keep going. You're doing great. Thank you.
All right, thank you. All right, next slide, please. All right, so they also did an assessment of intersections and found that in the vicinity of the 60th Street, so basically below 65th Street and the toll zone boundary, that none of the intersections would have an increase in delays that would exceed essentially the thresholds that are used for environmental assessments regarding adverse traffic effects. So they don't consider, even if there are potential increases in delays, that they would be significant enough to be considered adverse and require mitigation. So of the 76 intersections assessed on the east side, 7 would see increased delays, 61 decreased delays, and 8 would remain unchanged. So as I said, there are a few that may see increased delays, but they don't cumulatively rise to the level of being considered a significant impact because they're offset by those that would have decreased delays, at least based off of the modeling from the environmental assessment.
So when was the modeling done? And given the hospitals, all of the East River hospitals, I can't speak about NYU, but up above 60th Street, their expansion plans, do they have any idea how those expansion plans and increased patients and families and equipment and additional staffing will impact any of this? It's just a question. I just don't know how any of these in the future will actually work, because
Yeah.
I don't know when this was done, and because people aren't really going back to work so much, which led to these reports by the mayor and the governor. It's just, to me, a lot of unanswered questions. I know you don't know, but I just thought raising them might be at least the questions I have, and I see hands are flying up in a hurry. And we'll get to everyone when Craig is done. And thank you for your patience. I just thought I would raise some questions I have, because honestly, I just don't know.
Yeah, and I know I'm blanking on exactly when the environmental assessment modeling was performed and what data it was based off of. I thought it was pre-pandemic data, but I don't recall entirely, so don't quote me on that. And it's, I don't want to, yeah, I'm better off not speculating the answer to your question. I have some theories just from experience, but I don't want to, I don't want to make any false assumptions there. All right, next slide, please. All right, bike and pedestrian impacts. So pedestrian traffic would likely increase in the boundary zone area, which then they talk about the benefits to retail businesses and such. And then, as we've talked about in the past, they don't believe that there will be last mile switching from automobiles to walking trips, or people that are parking in the low 60s to avoid the tolls. I think we've touched on that many times before, so we don't have to go into that again. Next slide, please. All right, I don't know why I kept this one in there, so let's go to the next one. All right, and then in terms of community character impacts, because this relates to what the tolling infrastructure will look like, which is most going to impact the low 60s. The central business district tolling alternative, they say, will not, in an overall sense, affect the character of Central Park. And they say that there will be 10% lower traffic volumes during all time periods along all roadways abutting Central Park, like 5th Avenue and 59th Street. And then the Upper East Side Historic District, they're going to be installing one new pole with a mast arm with tolling equipment. I'll have a picture of that in a moment. And then, yeah, okay, I think that's really it on this slide. Next slide, please. So this is just a little visual depiction of what it's going to look like in terms of tolling infrastructure. So on the avenues, the tolling infrastructure would generally be placed between 60th and 61st Streets. And as you can see, it looks very similar to existing traffic signals, except the mast arms have the cameras on it. Next slide, please. And this is just a map denoting the locations of the different types of infrastructure where they're going to be placed. You're looking at, if you look horizontally where all those figures are, that is essentially the between 60th and 61st Street, where you see most of them, and then the others you see concentrated around the Queensboro Bridge, and then there are a few located just inside Central Park, those that are denoted as number 5. There are 2 in Central Park, and then there's one that I believe is located at 5th Avenue on that side. Next slide, please. And this is just their rendering of what it will look like at 5th Avenue at 61st Street. I don't know if you can, if it's very clear, but you can see the mast arm there and the infrastructure blending in. I apologize if I didn't make that large enough to be able to really see it. But and then there's a little sign there that they also point that they also show as being on the light post over there.
I have a question, Craig. Why are they putting anything in Central Park? If it has infrared light at night, maybe there are no cars except on the transverses.
I think that's a great question. I never understood that either.
And also, we don't know what impact infrared light or anything else might have on the migratory birds or other animals that reside in Central Park, including the bees and things. So
yeah, no, I don't understand Central Park, given that cars are essentially banned in Central Park. So that's a mystery to me, and I think that's one of the reasons I want to note that in here.
Okay, well that's good. We should make a note of that. Period. But thank you.
All right, next slide, please. All right, and then this is just looking an overhead view of the Queensboro Bridge, and you can see where the tolling system equipment would be mounted to existing overhead sign structures or structural elements on the bridge. And again, it's basically at every access or exit point except on the upper roadway ramp that comes down and exits down at 62nd and 63rd Streets. Next slide, please. So tolling detection information. So as I mentioned before, it's basically similar to Easy Pass and how things work at the cashless tolls on MTA properties right now, where if you don't have an Easy Pass, it will take pictures of your license plate and you'll be billed by mail. And the actual infrastructure will be in enclosures, so I guess they're not intended to be visually apparent. And then, as I think Alita, you were alluding to, the cameras included would use infrared illumination at night to allow images of license plates to be collected without the need for visible light.
So oh, I'm sorry, Craig. So they're not intending to do the flashing thing that you see at the bridges when a car goes through, or on the highways when there's one of those tolling structures and cars go through or trucks go through and it flashes a light. Because if these poles are 20 plus or 30 plus feet tall, they are at the level of people's apartments or offices, and I don't know how disruptive that would be. So do you have any idea? Infrared light doesn't do that, but I don't know about the rest of the time.
That is what I'm understanding it to be. I'm no expert when it comes to how the tolling systems will actually work, but that's what I'm inferring from what it said in here.
Yeah, that's just at night. And the readers that they do use, the Easy Pass readers do flash all the time. So I don't know what that will look like. I guess Christmas in July. Anyway, so sorry to keep interrupting.
No, that's fine. I think you're asking very good questions, and that's why I want to bring them up here. All right, next slide. I think we're almost done with this portion of it. Okay, in terms of the signage, I think I have on the next slide an example of what the signage will look like and the signs that will be essentially placed on existing infrastructure, just to alert people of the tolls and the toll zone and the boundary. So signs will be located along southbound avenues between 62nd and 60th Street. And then they'll be on the, approaching 60th Street, and then at other locations further up, but we don't need to focus on those right now. And I think, signs would also notify drivers and vehicles driving east and west along 61st Street. So there will be signs on 61st Street as well. All right, next slide, please. And again, here's a map showing where the different signage is going to be located. And again, even though it's hard to see here, much of it is going to be along this in the 60th, 61st, 62nd Street area, some along 66 as well, and then, as they said, further up in a few locations. Next slide, please. And this is just a visual depiction of what the different signage will look like. And this is an example of what will be placed in the vicinity of 60th Street.
Well, that's certainly a lot of signs.
Well, different signs in different.
I know.
Yeah.
More visual clutter, and I mean, maybe that's the least of the problems or potential, I shouldn't say problems, but potential issues here is the amount of signage that will be required.
All right, and next slide, please. Okay, and I think we could come back to this later because this is for the next piece. So that's just a little overview of the information that I was able to obtain from the EA. There may be other potential questions or topics related to the boundary zone that people may wish to bring up. I'm not trying to be restrictive, but I just want to at least put out there what we publicly know at this point. So I'm happy to take any feedback. Alita, do you have any other questions you want to pose before?
No, other than just general broad-based questions about the whole program. No. I'd like to know what it looks like in other cities that have done this. In London, for instance, I'd like to point out that a company located, as I mentioned, in Nashville will be overseeing and putting in the infrastructure for this. And I have questions related to that and transparency. But in the meantime, I don't think it hurts to just mention the agenda item again, which are boundary issues for those people living near 60th Street. And if we could keep comments from both the board and the public to that agenda item, then maybe we can, if everyone wants one, get a resolution by the end of the meeting, or at some point in the middle of the meeting if we have time to talk about the revenue issues. So if we could again keep it focused, I think that would be helpful. Anything, Craig?
Nope, that sounds great.
Okay, so then let's go to the public first. We have Erica and then Matthew Collins. Do you see them cited? It's not a lot of people, so I think they're easy to find. Erica?
Hi, Alita. I mean, I just have one question, because we can flag this dead horse until the cows come home. When is the full board going to take a decision on submitting the response? Because we could break it down and break it down and break it down further. But the bottom line is, if what Mohit said is true, it's clear where Kathy Hochul and Eric Adams lie on this topic. So I think at this point, the board needs to come to a decision and a recommendation overall. So I'd like to know when that's going to happen.
I don't think either Craig or I could answer that question. There has been a broad decision with Russell on the best way to approach this, and how we've not had a great deal of success with our requests, with at least with respect to the Transit Mobility Review Board having an Island of Manhattan resident, and even having 2 Manhattan residents from north of the border and south of the border. So I think a blanket no, if the board even got to that point, would not be very effective here. I don't know that they have come to community boards and talked about it, but if we can have resolutions that are tailored to what we see as problems, maybe we can have some input and have some reaction from the state, from our own legislators, even if Kathy Hochul and Eric Adams are not really interested.
What's the timeline for that? How many topics are there going to be? I mean, I appreciate all the work you guys are doing, but I feel like we're going to be sitting here and the tolls are going to be up, and there's still going to be discussion about resolutions.
I think they were talking, the last I heard, they were talking maybe about implementation in 2024, pushing it back a little bit. I don't know, but that's a lot of months and a lot of opportunity. I mean, I wrote down a note that I think impact on small businesses maybe is something to be discussed in the future, but I haven't talked to Craig about that. So that's something written with disappearing ink for now.
I mean, I think the outer boroughs notwithstanding, the fact that they're dividing up our community, from like literally dividing our boundary in half arbitrarily, so that if I live on 71st Street and I want to go below 60th, I'm going to have to pay a toll, is just sheer insanity.
Right. I know that there are a lot of issues with this, and people for actually years already have been raising a number of significant concerns and questions about the implementation of the plan. And perhaps as more details come to light, there are more and more questions. But this is a way that we've thought of taking approaches, or taking an approach that may have some kind of impact, because that's really the goal, is to be able to have impact. If they're forging ahead with it, I'm not sure that a no would be able to derail the entire project, at least without all of the other community boards in Manhattan and maybe the rest of the city, because of impact on their own residents and businesses.
Is there a plan? Do you and Craig have a plan you can share for, how many more topics, how long it's going to be, what the plan is to talk to other community boards in Manhattan impacted by it? Because I think that would be very helpful.
I've talked to CB7, CB5, and CB11. We've had representatives from 7 and 11 come to our meeting. CB5 is just getting started on this. I don't know what they've addressed or how long. And the ideas for the agenda that we've had have been evolving with the course of events and the topics that come up. I know that this is frustrating for a lot of people out there, and I don't blame you for feeling that there's an approach that you would prefer that the board take. But at this point, this is the way, and Craig, correct me if I'm wrong at all, that this is the way that we've chosen to address it, is issue by issue, because maybe the people up in Albany who are enacting the rules are not really thinking of the kinds of issues that we are, and maybe if they are, to the extent that we're trying to address them.
I completely agree, but I think there's got to be some kind of end goal and date.
Yeah, well, I think if I could just interject, I think our end goal is the MTA has committed to making the rounds of community boards in advance of this being implemented. And I think it would be ideal if we're able to, at such point when we are going to have a formal presentation, to be able to say, listen, we've spent a lot of time in this task force coming up with different recommendations, and here they are, and here's our chance to be able to present them to you, these recommendations that are hopefully well thought out and relevant and implementable, if you're willing to actually listen and be responsive to our concerns.
But Craig, we know how the MTA operates. By the time they come to do those presentations,
wait, you gotta let each one finish,
And,
please.
and not every community board's taking a position. If you look at Community Board 10, that's Central Harlem, they have a very focused resolution. They have 2 pages of whereas clauses, and then their recommendation is basically just their request, if you will, is in regards to just ensuring that the residents of their community aren't adversely impacted by congestion pricing, which would be based off of, I think, tolls and exemptions and those such policies. But otherwise, the whereas clauses were neutral to positive. Community Board 11 in East Harlem had an overall opposition one, but I'm not sure about others. And I'm not sure that that's going to be particularly useful and informative as we move further down the line. I think even tonight, I know that we have at least one representative of an assembly member on this call. And at other times, I think we've had other representatives of elected officials. And I think hopefully people will be listening to what we're saying and taking it back to people that may be able to help us achieve what we're looking for. So I don't know if that's going to be a satisfying response, but the best that we're doing the best we can. And not everyone is going to, at the end of the day, be able to agree with every resolution we do, or even with the actions that we take or don't take for that matter. But that's about all that I can say at this point. And I really think that we should try to move on and keep this moving. I think Alita and I have talked a lot about just not wanting to respect people's this week, especially with holiday preparations and stuff. So
I just want to, I'm sorry, Craig, I'm saying no interruptions, then I do, but I just want to reiterate that we're raising issues that they may not be aware of and providing solutions, potential solutions to these issues. And that may have a much more effective impact if everyone could bear with it than just a blanket no. If that were possible, there are people on the board who support congestion pricing for various reasons. And the other thing is if CB10 says they don't like it because of potential negative impact, it could be air quality as well. Because as someone brought up in previous meetings, more than one, is the idea that air pollution is not stagnant and it moves where the traffic moves. So there are different issues and different impacts. But if we come up with issues and say, this is something that you need to do, it's a proactive way of looking at it. And it gives them the opportunity to maybe latch onto it, if you will, and say, this is potentially good. There's an issue here, and this is something that people have thought about, because we're putting a lot of time into it. You're putting a lot of time into it by attending these meetings. So hopefully something will have some resonance and some impact. But Craig is right. We have talked about it for a long time, and hopefully there's just no way of knowing any of this. So let's move on. Let's try and stay focused if we can, because again, this is what we'd like to do, is have tailored resolutions. Erica, is there anything else you'd like to add that's specific to the idea of boundary issues?
No, I appreciate all the work that you and Craig have put into this. Thank you.
Thank you. You too. So we'll go to Matthew, Evelyn, and then Phil Kogan.
Hi, my name is Matthew Collins. I live on 60th Street between Park and Lexington, and it's a one-way street heading westbound. My garage is on 58th Street, in the border. It's the one that's just south of the basically the on-ramps to the bridge. And the one thing that has been consistently confusing is, and it's kind of addressed in the current presentation, which has been helpful, is to get from the garage to my apartment, the short route is basically it's out of the zone and then back into the zone. If I go south, then it's an awful lot of out of the way. Because it's the streets just don't work out correctly to going in the right direction. And I think, look, I'm a fan of congestion pricing also, and I appreciate that I will end up with less traffic and the rest of my walking around town. But I think if it would be helpful if the board would, as part of their recommendations, make it really clear how that sort of exception process works. Because it implied that people who like pop into the zone may, like the whole process of, if I go in or out of the zone, how does that billing work? You know, it's unclear how that process works. If there is an exception, there may not be. And so like how that actually works has got to be laid out clearly, because that obviously affects, you know, what garage I park in, how I don't use my car very often. It's a sort of a weekend or occasional use thing. And that will have an effect on, you know, sort of how I think about where I park and how I park. So I would appreciate, I think, you know, as a resolution, I think I would request that the board ask for really clear, you know, how all the stuff operates, right? I don't think we have a lot of choice in terms of the signage or, you know, the metering things. You know, I think we're going to be stuck with that. And it's already adding, you know, to the visual congestion in the city. You know, the governor wants this, the mayor doesn't care. So we're going to be stuck with it. I just ask that the mechanics of how it all works be really clearly laid out to people who are using it.
Yeah.
We did
Thank you, Matthew, for those comments. And I think this is something that we've definitely touched upon a number of times in past meetings, and is a concern that I think would be ideal for us to try to address in some manner. From the standpoint of the environmental assessment, I think it talked about essentially people in your situation would have to consider changing their garage location or the garage that they use based off of what would make the most sense for them in regards to how the tolling is assessed. And we know now that if the zone is essentially between 60th and 61st Street, you need to decide whether it's more advantageous for you to be above 60th Street or below 60th Street. That being said, I think we've spoken a lot about, given that they're essentially going to be tracking every vehicle's movements and know essentially how long they are going to be in the zone or crossing the zone, because there are different, if a vehicle doesn't, I want to explain this as clearly as possible. My understanding is if a vehicle goes into the zone and is recorded as having entered that zone, the toll will be assessed eventually once it's known that that vehicle has not left the zone in I think essentially it's what I'm trying to get at is that the system will be able to know that when you come in and go out. And one potential exemption or a strategy we may want to discuss is for people who are crossing for a very brief time frame. So if someone's recorded as going in, maybe they're forced to go in because there's construction on 61st Street and they're forced to make a left turn and cross the boundaries. Some situation like that, or someone that accidentally enters the zone, didn't intend to, and then immediately exits within a few minutes, that there should be a way of being able to record that and people not being charged a fee for that. That's an option that we could consider. I'm sorry for the long-winded description, but it's a little confusing to try to explain. But
we did, and I'm sorry, we did have in our resolution from last month that people going into the garage north of the zone and out of the garage south of the zone should not be assessed the fee. But the other question that I wanted to raise maybe for the future is if there are people who live in CB8 and work in New Jersey and they work around the Holland Tunnel or the Lincoln Tunnel, there is no way to get to those tunnels without being on city streets and being in the zone, even if you take the West Side Highway. And if everyone has to go up to the George Washington Bridge, not only will that congest the bridge even further, but it will contribute to air pollution because they'll be driving for further distances than they otherwise would. So I'm raising the idea of whether it makes sense to have exemptions for people who are just in the zone to go on a bridge or in a tunnel and not using the city streets to get around and making more congestion. Although I guess it depends on your definition, but that's neither here nor there for this evening. It just was a longer or a much broader idea of an exemption for a short amount of time that Craig had raised. Okay. So let's go to the next member of the public. That would be Evelyn, and then Phil, and then Boaz.
Evelyn, confirm unmuting. There you go.
Hi, good evening. Okay, so I hate to tell you, but there are not going to be any exemptions. I mean, so forget 60th Street. The gentleman that lives on 60th Street and thinks this is a great idea, he's not going to be able to take his car out of the garage, go onto 60th Street without getting rammed $23, period. End of story, okay? Because he's going to be on 60th Street and there'll be a light thing on 60th. It's what we were trying to do, was put the light thing, me and somebody in Liz Kruger's office put the light thing at the southern end of 60th Street. So you could actually use that as a right-hand turn to get onto Park Avenue and get to the parking places. That went over like a lead balloon. So this gentleman who thinks that it's going to be wonderful to walk around without any traffic.
Evelyn, I need to ask you,
Yes.
civility is
Yep.
a really important thing. So he has his reasons. Let's just respect what everyone.
No. I totally respect it. I'm just saying, if the light is on 60th Street, that sounds like he's going to get. Okay, so what I'm thinking is.
Excuse me, Evelyn. Actually, I should have pointed this out to him. If he's exiting on 60th Street, he doesn't get charged unless he crosses over, I
think
believe.
he said his garage was on 58th Street.
No,
Right.
his garage is on 58. So for him to get his garage and go in front of his house,
But
he's gonna get-
the toll will be assessed when you exit the zone or enter the zone between 60th and 61st. So if he were to stay entirely below 60th Street, I'm not sure. I thought that people below 60th Street, if they're driving within the zone, aren't getting tolled on a regular basis.
right.
It's only when you
But
plus
he would
interact.
have to take everything. If he was going for the weekend, he'd have to take his bags, take them to the garage. He still has to get out of Manhattan somehow, so he's going to be leaving the zone.
And then he will be told.
You-
So he doesn't.
And he'll be
actually have to
told.
carry
There's no
his-
way.
his bags,
Right.
but he will be told if he's at 58th Street and leaving on 60th.
That's right.
Street, He'll be told
That's
when he's
right.
in the zone.
That's
And
right.
so, yes,
Right.
They're trying to get.
Yeah. So
everyone who
yeah.
is going in or out.
I mean, Liz Kruger's office was trying to get the thing put at the southern end of 60th Street, which actually would have helped him, but his garage is on 58. So anyway,
Right.
having said all of this, the no significant impact is complete nonsense. It's going to impact all of us. It's going to impact all of us. The traffic on the so people will be on the upper roadway on the Queensboro Bridge. It will be packed jammed if there's a way to get on the if they can even get onto it, because then they can get onto the Upper East Side and jam the traffic on the Upper East Side. Anything to avoid the toll. I know drivers, that's the mentality. So anyway, so that's one side of this, and the pollution will just, never mind, be worse. The people who have stayed out of work and all the office buildings in Midtown that they're all saying we should, be nice if they could turn them into hotels, which they can't, or residences. There's something about the way that they're built. I was talking to architecture kids about this. Very, very difficult to convert office buildings, the big ones, but the little ones they could convert into apartment buildings. People are going to stay home. They won't even be coming in. So that's a whole population we're talking about. The MTA is not going to hit their target. I mean, I think Kathy Hochul needs to sit down with people who live in the zone and show her what this is going to cause. If there's a way to, I don't know, get the traffic patterns down, that's what they want to do. If that were real, I don't believe it. I think it's a money-making venture, and unfortunately. So anyway, it doesn't sound like, the parking situation in our neighborhood is going to be very, very, very difficult. That's what I am positive of. I hope the garages stay open, but the rates are going to go skyrocketing. So I don't know. I don't know what we're supposed to do, except it's kind of very sad, because I think that, you know, New York City living lifestyle is going to change dramatically. That's what's going to be the significant impact. Okay. And what one problem is gone one place, it's going to be created some other place. The traffic is not going to go away. It's going to go north. I guess the interesting thing that you just made, the point of people going over the bridge and then going into the toll zone, that's 23. Well, the bridge toll is going up $1, right? So let's say that it's $16. It would be 23 minus 16. They'd subtract the toll bridge.
No, we don't know. New Jersey is.
You don't know that.
Right.
That's an idea. Yeah. I doubt that seriously. They really won't hit their targets.
The money
Okay,
goes
they want to make $1 billion the first year.
I think what we can talk about the financial piece later. I think
Yeah,
we're
okay. Anyway, about that, the whole parking issue, it is a definite issue. It is a definite, and the traffic problem and the congestion that's going to be created in the Upper East Side dramatically in our area will be dramatic. That's all. And you know it, I know it, everybody knows it. It's a nightmare. It's a nightmare we're about to face. And the community board, it's too bad the community boards can't do joint resolutions together and stand strong, you know, in their resolutions, that if you're really going to go through with this, you've got to provide, do what the Londoners did. London provided parking spaces for people. Oh, New York's not doing that. We heard you say on the community board, nobody cares about parking. That guy on the MTA, well, he doesn't care about anything. He just wants the money. So it's not us. We live here. We, you know, anyway, that's all. That's it. Too bad.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, let's go to Phil and then Boaz.
Hello, everybody. Alita and Craig, thank you for taking on this task. It's kind of like a thankless job, like being a condo board member. I too have a car that's parked below 60th on 30th, and I live in the 70s. But that's not why I wanted to speak. Craig, if I understood your presentation on the last mile, they found that people wouldn't walk a significant distance below 60th, so that last mile was not an issue. And I question how that they arrived at that, because human nature says that one who drives into Manhattan is going to stop somewhere before 60th and park their car wherever they can on a street. And that's definitely going to have an impact on in the Upper East Side. And how they can say there's no impact because people won't walk, if I understood what you presented, that just doesn't make any sense. I think the boundary above 60th into the 70s, maybe even into the 80s, because MTA provides those buses, which will take you down into the congestion pricing zone. And so the logical thing to do would be to park anywhere north of 60th and take a bus or take the subway.
Their conclusion, just to clarify, was that they refer to the rational behavior theory, which is essentially that people are not going to be troubled, or are going to be too troubled, if they have to find parking north of 60th Street and then walk a certain distance beyond what is a reasonable distance from a time perspective, that they lose time by doing so. And that if you exceed 5 blocks of walking, then people are going to decide it's too much hassle and they'll pay the congestion fee to enter. Maybe not everyone's going to do that, but that was the foundation of the finding, that they don't believe that it's going to result in a significant amount of people parking just short of the congestion zone in the lower 60s. You may disagree with it.
Maybe not in the lower 60s.
Or near any subway station, for that matter.
Right. I mean, I think their idea of what human nature is felonious. And I
Yeah.
think I think the board ought to consider that when it makes its comments, because if it's difficult finding a parking place on the street now, it's going to be impossible once congestion pricing goes into effect. And I will stop there. Thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you.
Phil.
We tried to work with that last week and have some suggestions. Whether or not they fly, I don't know. My question is, how can they possibly anticipate whether people are going to walk? New York is a great walking city, and there may be more people than they anticipate who are going to park and walk. And I just don't know how they came up with this, with the data that they did, or the explanations. But I guess that's besides the point, and we're sticking with the topic. So let's go to Boaz. Are you done, Phil?
Yeah.
I guess you've been muted. So let's move on to Boaz then. Thank you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
And baby, yes.
Great job, yeah. Great job on the presentation. My only ask, add maybe a subscription offer for people that don't want, that have a car in Manhattan, they pay income tax, and maybe ask for the city to provide them a discount regarding a fixed discount for the congestion pricing, meaning that I don't know how many times I will have to get into the zone, outside of the zone, and so on. And I want to pay X amount, a fee every month, fixed amount. I hope it makes sense. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, that's an innovative approach, and that's interesting. It made me jot down an idea of a potential topic of other kinds of solutions to raise revenue, since this is a revenue producing scheme. The MTA has said so. So I don't want to take up more of your time. Let's go to the board then. There's no one else from the public. So Valerie, Judy, and Ed.
Well, thanks. To anybody who has a garage space below 60th Street, I suggest you start looking for a new space right now. It'll take you 2 years to find it. But on the topic, Craig, I appreciate what you've done here. I'm trying to understand, if you live on 61st Street and you want to get off the island of Manhattan, how can you do it without incurring a charge? Because you're right on the border. Is there a way can you get on the Queensboro Bridge with going over to Queens without having to pay a congestion fee?
Our understanding, based off of how the EA modeled things, is that you will have to pay a fee to get onto the Queensboro Bridge, regardless of which level you use and which entrance you use, because all the tolling infrastructure will be placed between 61st and 60th Streets. If you are coming in, as I mentioned, all of the inbound approaches are going to be tolled except for the upper level inbound ramp.
Right, but will there still be outer bound, right? I mean, you still have to be, you can't have just I guess you can do whatever you want. Will the Queensboro Bridge only be inbound?
No. It will be, you'll just go through the gantries when you're going outbound, no matter what. Inbound, it's a little less clear. And as of now, it seems as if they're not putting any tolling infrastructure for those who are coming in on the upper level roadway, which could present, I guess one of the questions I always had is whether that's going to just encourage people to not bridge shop, but lane shop, if you will, and
Right.
and specifically
I mean,
try to head towards that level if they're not intending on going south of 60th Street, and thus.
Well, I think
be able
that's
to
one of
avoid
the
a fee.
problems. I think that's one of the problems, because at 60th Street, you need to be able to, I think, you can't have that access to get off the island on that bridge. Not if you're coming off the FDR Drive and you want to get off the island, you can't just have it that you've got to go up to the Triborough Bridge to go to Queens. I mean, the FDR Drive will be an absolute parking lot. I mean, there will be no way off. It just doesn't make any sense. Plus, if you want people to be able to avoid the congestion zone to go downtown to either the Brooklyn Tunnel or whatever it is, there's no way for them. How are they going to do it? How are they going to do it?
To go
There is
downtown?
There
Well,
is some, sorry, Craig, there is something in there about access to one of those tunnels that even if you're on the street going to the tunnel or from the tunnel to the West Side Highway, you're exempted, but
Right,
that's
but you can't
just for
get to
that.
you can't get to the Midtown Tunnel to go to
Right.
JFK. And now
Correct.
you're telling me you can't go over the 59th Street Bridge to get to Queens to go to LaGuardia. So you can't get off the island
Well,
without paying the toll unless you go to the Triborough Bridge.
well, actually, you can in theory, because if you were, remember, there's that exception, I'm not saying exemption, exception for the FDRO Drive and West Streets. And if you were to not enter the internal road network of Manhattan and just stay on the FDR Drive or West Street and then exit directly from there onto, say, the Brooklyn Bridge or the Brooklyn Battery Tunnel,
Right, but
the
the
tunnel's
whole-
tolled, but the Brooklyn Bridge isn't. But in that respect, you
Right,
would.
but I'm just saying to have a natural flow of traffic and not increase pollution because you're causing people to go out of their way and spend more time in their cars, which I thought was not the objective of this, but maybe I'm wrong. If you can't get off the island from these other places, which just so happen to be in the congestion zone, you're creating an incredible issue. And the other thing is, when you gave that statistic about the other exits not being affected, was one of them the 71st Street exit? Because that happens to be one of the most dangerous exits off of the FDR Drive. And if people aren't going to get off at 60th, because nobody in their right mind would get off the 60th Street exit of the FDR Drive anymore, I don't even see how this is going to work from an infrastructure point of view. Because if you're coming down the FDR Drive off the Triborough Bridge, that is the most dangerous exit to exit at 71st Street, because people are coming on at 73rd and off at 71st. And literally, this is what's happening. And there's only one lane. From an infrastructure point of view, this makes absolutely no sense in terms of the boundaries. The boundary has to be below 60th Street for this to even have any sense at all. It can't be above 59th Street.
The law says inclusive of 60th Street.
I know. So my next point is the following, and we've done so much work on this. You guys have done, an incredible yeoman's effort, but we need to invite the electeds who keep telling us that there's nothing we can do about this, because nobody seems to care or understand all the commentary that we are hearing from the public on this issue. And the infrastructure be put in place. 2024 is a pipe dream, unless and it doesn't even jive with the mayor's new proposal for this new New York thing. How can you be promoting, turning Midtown Manhattan into something else when you're going to charge people an additional $23 to get there and back? It just doesn't. It's number 25 on the list, because they're never going to get past item 5 on their list. It's not going to happen. I mean, for the boundary, I think as written doesn't work, especially for the people who are along 60th Street. But in my group, for East 72nd Street Neighborhood Association, et cetera, it doesn't work because it doesn't sound to me like anybody did in any environmental assessment of how the infrastructure is going to work. And I think it was Phil Kogan who said the last mile. Well, you know what? We're going to just create a new industry of pedicab that's going to take you from 70th Street to 60th Street. and people will be just parking all over.
Yeah.
It's just,
I was just going to say, just in response to your question, I think the finding was that overall the traffic volumes will decrease because fewer people are going to be driving into Manhattan, and thus any potential, you may disagree, but
I just have to say this, for my entire life, I've lived here my whole life. I'm more than 59 years old, okay? there has always been traffic from Astoria, Queens to JFK, no matter how wide they make the lanes to go to JFK. And you always get stuck at Liberty Avenue. And I think my entire life, no matter how long I live, even if I live to be 150, and even if they expanded it 10 lanes of traffic, okay, that traffic is always going to be there. And people who think that this is a traffic reducing mechanism, they are buying into a con man's game. That's all I can say. It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen.
So,
And we're just, the only other alternative I will tell you, I agree with Boaz. My plan for that is that if you live on the island of Manhattan, you get charged one flat fee for going in and out of the zone for an entire year. And that's it. I don't understand why people who live on Staten Island get a reduction to go over the Verrazano Narrows Bridge. And we're talking about charging ourselves $23 each way to go on our same island. Makes no sense to me whatsoever.
well,
That's all.
maybe, I mean, Valerie, a lot of what you've raised are potential unintended consequences of the plan. So maybe that is a future agenda item, or unintended consequences and impact on groups that they have not or are not foreseeing. Plus, maybe another agenda item as well is alternatives to this particular plan to raise revenue for the MTA, because I think everyone
But
could-
I think we've got to get our electeds to really understand what is happening, because quite frankly, I mean, I see who's on the phone call tonight, but I don't really think, especially our new electeds who are in Albany or whatever, really understand what we are talking about. I mean, I don't want to get off topic, but we're still the only game in town of residents of New York City that are paying extra money to go to our homes when we land at JFK or LaGuardia Airport, and it's an outrage, and it shouldn't be happening.
well,
And
that
they told us it was going to go away when they actually instituted congestion pricing. So if congestion pricing is another 3 or 4 years away from when the thing was implemented, we shouldn't be penalized for this. In some ways, it goes to the transparency question. So I'll let somebody else talk. But that, I mean, it's just, this is bogus all the way around.
it does raise a lot of questions, but thank you.
I think our resolution should be the 60th Street boundary. This just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, if people support that, Craig, I'm not sure we can't ask for a change in the law based on what the community of people in CB8, in this community district 8 or its surrounding areas think is viable or untenable about the potential plan. But we could see how people think and if there's a resolution and if people support it or not. I think, Valerie, I think we're ready to go to Judy and then Ed and then Michelle, unless you had something to add. Okay, so Judy, please.
Okay, I'll try to be as concise as possible. First, I want to thank you, Alita and Craig, for the great job you're doing. And going back to some of Erica's comments in the very beginning, I think we just can't say no. I think at each one of these meetings, whatever topic we're on, we need to pass a resolution focusing on certain issues that we've discussed during the meeting. And each resolution, each month, or however meetings we have during the month, and that these resolutions be passed on to the electeds and to the MTA. So going back to the very beginning, Craig, my first thing was, when you were going over the study, you said there was 10% lower volumes during all periods. I find that you were talking about the park, but I would assume that's all across 60th Street. I find that very hard to believe that there's 10% less volume early in the morning and at night when people come and go from the city. Certainly here on the east side, the traffic early in the morning and late at night is at the beginning and end of business is much heavier. So I find that comment, it was in red, I find that just unbelievable. So since you said this study may have been done pre-COVID, I think when if we pass a resolution tonight, we might say, whereas this resolution was done at a time a while ago and may be out of date now, because I'll get back to the point about the garages not being in existence that they considered in when they did the study. So I think there are other issues in their study that need to be looked at and may be out of date because the study was done maybe 2 or 3 years ago if it were pre-COVID. So that's my first thing. My second thing is I don't understand. I have a question and I don't understand something about the bridge. When they come off the bridge and they go across 60th Street, right? 60th Street is not below. They're going to be told. Is that correct?
When they come off
The bridge.
and exit onto 60th Street, yeah, they will be told because technically they are crossing into Manhattan below 60th, below the boundary,
They're on
inclusive of
60th
60th Street.
Not if they're on 60th Street. They're
Oh,
not
if-
below 60. Are you telling me all the people who live on 60th Street and if they drive across 60th Street are being told?
No, because they would be considered living within the toll zone and they only get charged when they cross out of the toll zone.
Okay, so fine. I think our first thing is, in whatever resolution we do tonight, the people who come off the bridge and go directly across 60th Street, not turn down, going down second, they're not going into the zone. They're on 60th Street.
No,
So
they're
that's-
already in the zone. They if you're entering via the bridge and exit onto 60th Street, you are getting told as if you are entering the zone
Well, I
from
think
north
that's
of
an error.
60th Street.
I think that's an error. You can either make a left turn or you can go straight. And I think the people who go straight should not be told if they're going on 60th Street or going uptown. So that is also another thing I'd like to bring to your attention. Also, not tolling the entrance when you come off the upper level between 62, 63, 60, 61, 62, and 63. When you come off there, the traffic now is absolutely incredible. You can't tell me that this being the only way into Manhattan from out on the island, that there isn't going to be more traffic on that level. If you're going to toll all the other entrances and exits when you go across to 60th Street, then you've got to toll that. I mean, it just doesn't make sense. The traffic here in the 60s is terrible, and that's going to make it far worse. So that's a third suggestion I have for a resolution. Either the whole bridge gets tolled or none of it gets tolled. I don't know if other people agree with me, but come here in the 60s and spend time, ask Mohit, who lives on 60th Street, right where all those cars are coming off, about all the traffic that he gets in front of his apartment building.
Right. So right now, just so we're all on the same page, right now, the proposal that they modeled has everyone coming in via the bridge who exits onto 60th Street. So basically everyone on the lower level which means you can either make a left turn on 2nd Avenue or you could proceed straight on 60th Street, or you could, I guess, also do that quick U-turn and go east on 60th Street. They will all be told because the gantries will be on the bridge itself, and it is as if you're crossing from outside the zone.
That's what they're doing, but I'm saying to you that they need to look at some of these that I don't think it's correct. If you're going across 60th Street, you shouldn't have to pay.
Okay, so.
But I just, Lloyd, I'm sorry, but that would be in conflict with the congestion pricing law in which the toll zone is inclusive of 60th Street, which is why they are placing all the gantries to track entries and exits
Okay.
below 60th and 61st Streets.
So then let me ask you a question. I live at 220 East 60th. That's between Second and Third.
Right.
And I'm going across 60th Street in a cab to get to the west side. I'm not going past 60th Street. I'm paying a toll.
No, only if you enter on the bridge. But if you are already on 60th
Well,
Street,
then, hey, that's exactly there. You got my point. If we're making suggestions to them, one of my suggestions is if you're going across 60th Street, you shouldn't have to pay a toll. I don't know if other board members agree with me, but I think that I see some hands floating around and thumbs up that that's a suggestion.
Well, you can raise your hand again and propose a resolution or make a friendly amendment if someone else does, but something that seems clear from what you're saying, from what Valerie said, from what other people said, is that people will take actions to reduce the amount of money that they pay. And I don't know, honestly, whether the environmental assessment took that into account or recognizes that that is human behavior and that will be the outcome. And that's why Richie Torres, I believe, is advocating against the program because of the potential for even worse stop traffic on the Cross Bronx by diesel fume spewing trucks in order to avoid the tolls of Manhattan. So there are definitely unintended consequences, and maybe that's something worth exploring. But one of the issues that you raise in terms of it making no sense to toll part, but not all of the bridge, or all of the bridge, but not for people who are just on the FDR drive. I mean, I don't really understand how it's going to work, but those are issues we've heard from people on this committee about how they avoid tolls or reduce tolls by taking certain actions. So you want to multiply it by 10 million people, maybe, and that's what happens.
So can I just make sure I'm understanding? So Judy, essentially you're suggesting that the toll zone boundary should be moved between 60th and 59th as opposed to between 60th and 61st.
Right. I would think that would make a lot more sense, or between 59th and 58th.
And you don't think that that would bring more people onto the bridge and allow for, and essentially result in bridge shopping where it would inundate the bridge with and your neighborhood
If
with
you
more
don't
traffic?
toll, first place, I think the whole thing's unfair, because if I'm making the resolution, I would say that the upper level coming in from Queens needs to be, and by the way, I put Mohegan on the wrong entry level before, but coming off at 62nd, 63rd, the upper level, that's just going to be inundated. People from Queens, why would they take the lower level? They would take the upper level, particularly if they don't need to go to Midtown. That's ridiculous if they don't think there's going to be more traffic there. So, I mean, I've given you a few things on a resolution. I don't believe that the 10% lower volumes during all periods of the day, and that's exactly what it read, what you put on the screen, is accurate. So we have a number of issues here that we can put into a resolution. I think putting these issues into a resolution at each meeting and then bringing it forward to the full board, and the more issues we put together and we give to our electeds and send to the MTA, the more chance maybe somebody will discuss them. So I don't know what the others think, but that's just my thinking. So I've taken enough time. But we can't just blanket say no. We have to give them specific things we want to see changed.
Well, that's what we're trying to do.
Right. And I think you're both doing a great job.
It's not a fishing for compliment thing, but thank you.
No.
Anyway. I'll take a thank you anytime.
Yeah, and I'm not trying to debate you or anything. I'm just trying to understand what your intention is and make sure that if it is going into resolution, that I'm able to make sure it makes sense
I
and is
think that
logical.
the whole bridge needs to be told. First place, Barry and I tried getting that with Sam Schwartz 10, 15 years ago, an issue of tolling the 59th Street Bridge so that the traffic would be split evenly. We think the bridge, the tunnel, all those access points should be tolled because there's more traffic, excuse me, not the tunnel, the bridges that are not tolled, the ones from Brooklyn and very Queens and the Bronx, makes for more traffic. If you're going to toll one bridge, why not toll them all? And then your traffic is really evenly spread out if you toll all the bridges. So, but that's another story, another time. Right now, we're just talking about the 59th Street Bridge. So
Well,
that's it for me.
You could certainly raise the idea that that traffic may move in ways that have not been considered in order to minimize tolls, and we just don't know what those are if there is the right opportunity to do that. Thank you so much, Judy. Ed, and then Michelle.
Thanks, Alita. Thanks. Thanks, Craig. Judy, I agree with everything you said. I would propose the resolution. It's like an a la carte menu of all the things that you offered up. I like all of them. But a couple of quick things before I forget. To the gentleman who talked about the behavior, I just want to go back to the core issue, which is this EA, this environmental assessment. Again, we've talked about this for years. Whoever's paying for it, whoever's buying it, it's getting the result they want. We all know this. And but good policy is good analysis, good regression analysis, good numbers. And this lacks all of that. Good witness input to all the issues people have been raising. And if I may just anecdotally, as a veteran of the traffic wars, if I can refer to them, of Washington, D.C., of which, in New York, D.C., it's an even match. I'll tell you, gang, I've been in both. It's an even battle who wins in viciousness. But there are behavior shaping things that are not being taken into account by this EA, which is where I'm beginning. They're just looking the other way. They just put up the blinders and go, I don't see anything. I don't see that elephant in the room. Of course, people change their behavior. Of course, they shop for bridges. The same reason I lived in Old Town Alexandria is that I had Route 1, I had the Parkway, and I had 295 to get to Capitol Hill. It's the same reason that you left 10 minutes, made it 40 minutes or an hour and 10 minutes. It's the same reason when we go visit my cousin in Sheffield on Thanksgiving that I refuse to give the MTA a nickel, even though we can afford it. It's just a matter of personal pride and whatever digging my heels in. I'll go over the Willis Avenue Bridge and go to Bruckner just to avoid paying the money going over the Triborough. And you better believe I'm looking for the Willis Avenue Bridge on the way back. And I see Erica laughing. You better believe it. My wife makes fun of me. I don't care. I'm not giving them another nickel. And because they haven't shown they know how to handle the money. But again, I digress, as I'm sorry, I want to do, but I don't feel passionately about this issue, as you can tell. But one thing to really get to something we can talk about and do on a resolution, and Judy, I don't know how you feel about this, and Michelle's coming up next to bat, so maybe she can put this all in a resolution. I don't know, Michelle, what you think. But Craig, you always keep falling back on, and I know the advocates always fall back on, oh, but we can't do anything. Oh, but our hands are tied. Oh, but it's a done deal. Oh, but we have the law. Well, oh, guess what? There's a thing called an amendment. You can always, but you can change the law. And how about that? How about getting our elected officials in here and going, oh, but guess what? Au contraire, there's quite a bit of pushback on this for a variety of reasons, aside from just the sheer fact you haven't taken into the reality of what they call when they're talking, what was it, rational behavior theory? I'll tell you rational behavior theory. It's stopping and walking more than 5 blocks to avoid paying a $23 pop to go into the zone. And that premise that no one will walk more than 5 blocks, oh, please, this is New York City. You fall out of bed, walk 5 blocks if you're a true New Yorker, please. Come on. 5 blocks, maybe Washington, DC, but not New York. So I would say that the premise of any resolution we might have would be, one, that the EA needs to be looked at again. The premise of all of this charade, if you call it that. The fact is that the numbers, like Judy was pointing out, are off in the evening and in the morning. I can tell you, as you all have heard me talk for years about the hockey trip I take to LIC. All know that I go over there at 7 at night. It's bad. 10 o'clock, it's packed. And one other point I would like to make here that no one's talked about on unintended consequences, another basis for looking at this again, is the fact that you're actually popping me $23 to go to Queens. I'm not going into the zone. You're popping us to go $23 into Queens. That's what you're doing. When I come back, maybe we're going on vacation next week. I'll write something on the airplane. But I don't know how everybody feels about this. But when you think about it, I live in 72nd and 3rd. My son plays hockey over there at City Ice Pavilion. Nice plug there. And you just go over the bridge. You go over the upper roadway because the lower roadway is a nightmare. Anybody who drives knows. I learned this trick years ago. You go over the upper roadway. So I get out there. You go down York Avenue, right? You go up. You go to 57th, and you come in. So you're in the zone for two crummy blocks. I'm in the zone for two crummy blocks to go to the upper roadway to go to Queens. So the whole point is not to go into the zone, but the point is to go to Queens. And I'm getting popped $23 to go to Queens, right? And then I get popped coming back, right?
Well,
so maybe I only get popped one way, but you're going to get nailed one way or another, and that's just to go. And that's the point. You go, oh, but you really went into the zone. No, you forced me into the zone. So okay, so I'll change my behavior. So then what I'll do is I'll drive up to the Triborough, which I hate, but I'll drive up there to save the $10 or whatever the discount that they supposedly are giving me. So again, this is in contravention of the very policies that they purport to be putting out. Again, it's a little bit like when I was in law school and the professors are out there, no disrespect to academia out there, but the reality is that, you get these committee reports, please, we all know, if you watch Charlie Wilson's War, how these things are being passed. This is just cover. Okay, it's like the committee report. This isn't really what's going on. Okay, it's for when you stand up there to go, this is why we really put this out. No, it's not. It's because you cut a deal. This is an unwritten tax on cars because people are afraid to raise people's taxes because you're an elected official. I'm sorry to be so crass and so cynical about it, but I will say it because other people have been, and I've gone on too long. Michelle, you're up next. I throw out the idea of the resolution. Maybe we say one that asks our elected officials to maybe amend the law instead of having this great safety net of, oh, we can't do anything. The law's handcuffed us. Well, let's unhandcuff ourselves and have the elected officials amend the law and change where the gantries are placed, because it is absolute insanity to place them where they are and to be getting popped like that coming off the bridge. It's, again, no one's really thought this through because there's such a rush to get the money to try to finance this. They would just threw it all together, slapdash, as they always do in April and May, to pass the budget. And this is how it's always done. So I would just say maybe that's part of a resolution. Sorry, I've gone on way too long. So anyway.
No resolution out there. If you want to make one, Ed, you just got to wait for your next turn. And you've been muted. So you've been muted. It's Michelle's turn. Thank you. Michelle?
Yes. Okay. Yeah, I think we've established the EAs, they're always self-serving, always. And that's been an argument with this board and developers, with everybody. Not only are they always self-serving, but they're always dated, because the time from when an idea pops into somebody's head to the time when it comes to even being near fruition, you're talking about years. We had an entire program based on a study that was done 15 years prior to when the program was instituted. and that was the neck downs on Park Avenue in the 80s. It was based on schools that were open that are now closed. The study was done 15 years before the program came into effect. Also, if you want to talk about pattern, just if you want to go to Brooklyn, drive down the FDR Drive. If you go to the left through the tunnel, you whiz into Brooklyn. If you go to the right over any of the bridges that go to Brooklyn, namely the Brooklyn Bridge, Manhattan, Williamsburg, you're in a bumper to bumper traffic jam. Why? Because they have no tolls and the tunnel does have a toll. So all this is like if you lived 15 minutes on the face of the earth, you sort of know that this is true. So the fact that we have to explain it to the MTA is of great concern to me. But what's of even greater concern to me is, and I use the pun, what's the off-ramp? In other words, what happens if they put this program into effect and it's not working well? They're not generating the revenue they hope to generate. The traffic that they hope to divert is unsuccessfully diverted, or any number of things could go wrong in the future after this is implemented. Do they ever revisit it and rescind it if it's not working? Or what's the solution? If they're not meeting their financial target, is the solution to just keep raising the toll? You know, years ago when Bloomberg first proposed this, he started with $9. And of course, it all sort of fell by the wayside when it was proposed then, because as all of the questions were asked, just as we're doing tonight, the answers were never satisfactory. They could never come to enough satisfactory answers that led a percentage of people to think this is a good idea. And to my mind, those that do want to see it happen, and as Craig and others have pointed out, that this board voted to support it. Yes, at the time when it was a concept, this board never voted, never had a resolution on congestion pricing when it had detail. It had the resolution when it was a concept, and you're now going back at least 5 years. Well, you still don't have the detail. And to my mind, you're never going to have the detail until this is in action, and they're going to sort of do it on the fly as they go. And they're going to do it on the fly as they go to make it work at all cost. My question is, and I think we should have a resolution on this, is that if it is not working, if it's causing more congestion, if it's causing more pollution, if it's not generating enough revenue, that the plan should be examined and rescinded. So I'm not willing to have this in my life for the rest of my life. So I'm looking for a way to either head it off at the path now, or at least have a mechanism in place that would call an end to it if and when the time comes. Those are my comments. Thank you.
Okay, well, before we go back to Evelyn, I'd like to say if anyone wants to make a resolution, suggest a resolution that after Evelyn speaks, that would be a good time on this. So I know a lot of people have expressed opinions, but there has been no resolution forthcoming. So this is a thinking opportunity. Thank you. Evelyn?
Evelyn, confirm unmuting. That's *6 on the phone. There you go.
Oh, okay. Sorry. No, just what we were in the beginning. Remember in the beginning when we were saying put it below 60th Street because of the parking on Park Avenue? I mean, now it's more than ever. If you ask for tolling on both levels of the bridge, they're going to move the line to 63rd Street. I guarantee it, because I'm just, you're asking for trouble. It is better to really request, but I see the point. okay? And the person is right that all the traffic will go on the upper level because they'll be avoiding the toll, and they'll go into the Upper East Side. They'll get off at 63rd and they'll go north into the Upper East Side, and they'll go try to look for a parking place. What's going to happen is people are going to be going around with their cars looking for parking spaces. I mean, it's never mind. That's unintended consequences looming in the distance. If we really beg, Liz Kruger is actually on our side with the below 60th Street thing. Her chief of staff said, so we should put this little sign at the southern end of 60th Street. That way you can get on 60th Street off the bridge. You can go over to West Side Garages, or you can go over to you'd have to go on to Park and then go up through the park to get over there, because you can't go on 59th Street to get over to the West Side. You see, it's all just, nobody thought this out at all. Anyway, the idea of putting it below 60th Street is, you don't have to say no, but you can say no unless. I mean, I don't know if, I would be really adamant about this. They're just asking for all kinds of problems. Anyway, that's what I wanted to say. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.
Well, I would just like to say, I think, just listening to this and just thinking about it from my perspective and working professionally in transportation, I think that you can't have it both ways. It either needs to be a toll boundary below 60th Street, meaning below between 59th and 60th, and you toll everything on the bridge, or you leave it as is and toll everything on the bridge. I think you can't encourage people to use the Queensboro Bridge without it having, in terms of unintended consequences, massive repercussions in terms of congestion that it would generate in the low 60s if we made the Queensboro Bridge an appealing option for people to be able to not have to pay a toll to come in. So I just want to put that out there as we're thinking about how to handle this issue.
Well, we've seen that Canal Street is really packed because trucks are avoiding the Verrazano toll. So they take Canal Street to get over to the Holland Tunnel. I don't know if they could go on the Holland Tunnel or to get to the West Side Highway and go over to New Jersey another way, or go east. But they already know that Canal Street is jammed because of the tolls of the Verrazano. So I don't know, but let's go. Craig, if you're ready, I think Ed has his hand up. Is that all right?
Yes.
Ed?
Okay, so I would like to make a resolution, if it's seconded. I would like to make a resolution that we call upon our elected officials in Albany. That would be our new elected officials going in, Alex, Boris, and Rebecca, and Liz Kruger, Senator Kruger,
Senator Serrano.
Senator Serrano, thank you. Just getting to Serrano, thank you.
Sorry.
No, thank you. No, yes, you're right on the same page. And I would like to basically ask them to look at and examine in Albany in this legislative session the unintended consequences or policy infirmities that are inherent in the current law as it is on this congestion pricing, for a lot of the reasons that we've talked about tonight. Whether legally we have to have these gantries where, Craig, you're talking about them because look, is the point that, as you were talking about on these gantries, is the point to toll you coming in on the bridge, or is the point the congestion pricing at the 59th Street Bridge? Because whatever it is, that's not sort of the point of here, my resolution. The point is, and if I could, that's seconded, that we ask our elected officials, the state, Senate, and Assembly members to look at this law, to amend it, to cure these infirmities that we have illuminated and elucidated tonight at the meeting, whether it's the outdated nature of the traffic numbers that you talked about, Judy. I see the thumbs up. Thank you. Michelle, the gentleman, I saw him, he was talking about speeding up. I think of him now trying to speed up the parking, all of that, all those things, to look at that and to make whatever amendments they feel are appropriate to the law, to make this either a more fair or more just or whatever it is, policy, whatever, however you want to say it. Anyway, that's my resolution. If anybody's on board with that, and
Michelle seconded it, and I think I saw Judy with a thumbs up as well.
thanks to both.
You want to say before other people address it, Ed?
No, I think I've already talked about 3 turns worth the last time. I think I've already pointed it all out, and I'm just jumping on everybody else's. I see the gentleman there, Phil Cogan, Mr. Cogan. I see him there. I think he's the one talking about the parking and the walk in the 5 blocks. All those points. I talked 3 persons, shares worth. So that I don't have any more things to add. But I'm here. I'm still here, even though you just see the bridge.
Okay. All right, so it's been seconded. Let's go to Judy and then Michelle.
Yeah, when we're talking about elected officials, I think Alita, you or somebody is interviewing, I think his name is Assemblymember Bog this week and he has the top part of Community Board 8 on the parks over near 5th Avenue and over near the river. So we should include that assembly member. I'm going to watch that interview because I don't know him.
I'm not doing that, Judy. It was going to be Alex Borres, but he was unavailable. So
well, whoever, but we should include that assembly member as well, since he's part of our district. And I do second the motion. And I just think in the whereases, Craig, if we could refer to this study that they've done and that maybe some of the statements they've made in the study may not be accurate at this time as one of our whereases. Craig?
Okay. And again, I was just trying to do a search and I couldn't find the date of the data that was used for it. So I just want to be careful to not make a false statement, and I'll obviously look into that.
Maybe you can call someone and ask them when there must be a date on that study somewhere.
Right.
Isn't that a concern that there's no apparent date? I mean, I imagine there's one someplace, but
I'd have to dig through the documents. I'm sure it's indicated in there because basically these models are updated on a regular basis, and it's just a matter of how they use data that may be pre-COVID, and not that traffic patterns have shifted all that much, because all the reductions in traffic that we saw during the early days of COVID have now ceased.
Well, except that people are not going to work regularly. They're going to work maybe 2 or 3 days a week. And I don't see how that cannot alter the situation, both from a revenue making point. I think someone, maybe Ed raised it, and from a traffic pattern point, because if people are only going to work Tuesdays, Wednesdays, Thursdays at best, that shifts a lot. And without knowing more about when the study was done, it becomes hard to pinpoint issues or points that it raises that may be of concern to the public and to members of the board.
Yeah, and I keep going back to that 10% lower volumes at any period, that the traffic is same all the time. I mean, that's just not accurate, Craig. I mean, if I go stand out on my street corner and I watch the traffic all day long, I can tell you the times that the volume is heavier.
Right. And as I said, I make no claims as to the validity of it. I literally am just pulling it, reporting the facts that as the EA claims.
I just wanted to get that into a whereas, because I think it's important. And I think we need to have them look at that or come back to us with an answer on that. That's my only point. And probably if I spend all the time you did going through this document, which I have in the past on other documents, I'd probably find a lot of other things that I'd want them to come back to me on. So if you can put that in the whereas, I'd appreciate it.
Well, so maybe we should write this up and bring it before the full board, but for the next time, the kinds of questions that people have that they don't feel are documented in the EA or have an unknown basis for their conclusions should just be requested for, if that's clear at all grammatically, that we're asking for information on specific points because that's the way to get information. And we don't know what all of those points are, but maybe that's something for another, maybe the next meeting too. So
I just pulled up and have an answer to the question. So the model that was used, the best practice model as it's known, or BPM, includes roadway and transit networks and land use data observed and forecast for 2010, 2017, 2020, and 2045. For the project, the roadway and transit networks and land use data were used as the basis to forecast the effects of the tolling program in the opening year, which was predicted to be 2023, because it provides the most recent pre-COVID pandemic data, including but not limited to 2019 traffic counts. In addition, as described in Chapter 1 of the EA, pre-COVID-19 pandemic baseline conditions are considered the appropriate way to define the near-term 2023 no action alternative conditions as the region rebounds, and to forecast to 2045 a horizon year. So modeling a horizon year is as the duration in which the model goes out to, a horizon year that reflects a long-term condition not biased by periodic disruptions.
Okay, so obviously this was done a while ago. They don't know about the garages that closed. So that makes on-street parking more difficult. And if more garages close, it makes it even more difficult. So
they also don't know about new people patterns of work. If they're assuming that 2023 with a presumed end or reduction in COVID behavior is the same as 2019, how much of this is still accurate? Because the whole reason for the mayor and the governor's plan is that people are not going back the way they anticipated. So maybe there's a question there. I don't know.
well, that's why I thought maybe in the whereas we can talk about the accuracy of the best practice data that was used, and how it affects what they're doing.
Yeah, if they're forging ahead with something that's based on what they consider a fair and reliable and valid study, but the study is making assumptions that are not necessarily how people are acting now, then that maybe that's something to bring up.
Why couldn't we put that as you people word things, Craig and Alita, so well? Why can't we put that as part of whereases before the resolution?
Well,
I mean, I think we need to talk about that issue. We need to bring that issue to their attention.
Certainly.
Thank you, Judy. Anything else?
No, that's it. Thank you.
Michelle and then Valerie.
Well, I'll call the question on that resolution. I have another resolution I'd like to make if you call on me later. And also, I would like to remind everyone that time is moving along and I want to get to the finances and everything of the MTA. So I hope we're being mindful of the time, but I called the question.
Would you hold off so Valerie could speak, Michelle, please?
Sure, happy to.
Thank you. Valerie?
Thanks, Michelle. I just to follow up on what Judy was saying, given that the study is quite frankly stale and just inappropriate. I mean, you have to look at since 2010, the expansion of the hospital corridor along York Avenue. I mean, again, I go to the 72nd Street exit. I amplify everything that Judy said, but I think we should be really specific. I mean, the whole traffic pattern along the east side has changed since.
Excuse me, Valerie, that's in there. So because I've provided this data that goes into this model, in my professional life. I can tell you that cyclically, agencies are supposed to report significant developments that are being projected in the near term so that they could be included in this model, and therefore the modeling includes the projections as to the
I don't
number of
think there's any
employees,
way
number of
we know that.
residents. What's
You
that?
may say that, I understand what you're saying, but I don't think there's any way to know that the MSKK project is in there on 73rd and 74th Street. And the EDC is going to build a brand new building there that Hunter College isn't going to have anymore, that's going to have a life science development in it. The blood center the blood center tower would have never been considered in there, given the fact that it had a 75-foot height limit. So I think that's, we can let them tell us. We can only act on what we know. And I appreciate your professional knowledge about that. But I think we should take every opportunity to show every fact that we know about that isn't specifically cited in the study.
But what I'm saying is that that's not the case, because New York City planning is supposed to essentially have a compilation of all the projects that they see as being potentially occurring in coming down the pike, and they include information that relates to the significance of it and the potential impacts of it, so that it can be included in it. So it's not going to be a precise number, but if there is a proposal for a 200,000 square foot medical facility on the Upper East Side, and it's in the hospital corridor, and it's not expected to be completed until 2023, that information is going to be provided. That's going
right. But what I'm saying to you, with all due respect, I believe that information is not put in there because no one could have anticipated a 220-foot tower and the blood center thing, because it wasn't even supposed to be built there in the first place.
But what I'm saying is, I can tell you, I know that these types of projects are submitted for this purpose.
Well, then let's see it in the footnotes, because when I read the GIS for the Second Avenue subway, the footnotes did not account for a lot of the foot traffic and the way that
it would be impossible for them to denote every project in there.
Well, then let us see what they did denote, and I bet you dollars to donuts the MSK project on 71st Street and the impending usage now of the site on East 74th Street is nowhere contemplated.
And the Extel building and the sale to a healthcare facility on 79th and 1st could not have been known, because that was something that didn't break until a few months ago.
And the expansion of Rockefeller University, the new tower that's over the FDR.
You're essentially questioning the entire methodology and manner in which modeling occurs, and I could tell you.
Yes, I am, and I think we should.
But I
we
think
shouldn't take any of that for granted. We should not take into effect that everyone who works for the city is as circumspect and meticulous as you are, Craig.
No. That's not my point, though.
I know. I'm giving you a compliment, but I'm telling you, based on what I've seen.
I appreciate that, but I think we need to draw the line between. I think obviously questioning what the findings are and raising concerns that perhaps some of it is outdated is certainly fair game. But I think making maybe accusations is a strong word, but making claims that all these projects aren't included somehow, and that that the inputs into the model are wrong. That's where I
think we can say that we are questioning any inputs in the model because of the incredible, unexpected, just topsy-turvy effect of COVID-19. That's what we're trying to say. That anything that was modeled in 2010 has to be relooked at. I mean, we have a mayor and a city planning commission that is questioning the entire zoning of Midtown right now. So for us to say that they want to implement something based on a structure that was looked at in 2010 projecting into 2024, 2025. It's just not right. I mean, would they have envisioned all the bike lanes that we have? Just as an aside? I don't think when they looked at that, they even ever thought about the fact that in putting in congestion pricing right now, we would have all these electric bikes, which were illegal at the time. And what effect that has had on congestion and traffic. And the fact that the city of New York has closed many streets. I don't think that was taken into account either. So I think there's a lot of facts and changes to the city infrastructure that were never considered in that study. And I'm not saying that it's wrong, but I think we should say that it needs to be looked at in the context of even what's happened. We have had incredible changes in this city over the last 3 or 4 years. And, you know, I hate to say the open streets program because it's really the closed streets program, but all of this changes to the infrastructure have changed congestion and traffic patterns. And I really don't think, and you've read it, so you're closer to it, that any of that was envisioned in that study. I don't think there's any reference to any kind of motorized vehicles, scooters, bikes, tripods, whatever you want to call them, and dedicated bike lanes and dedicated bus lanes the way we've seen in the last 3 or 4 years, because that has exploded.
I'm going to.
All I'm asking for is a whereas clause.
No,
Sorry, I don't want to spend any more time on it.
I'm not going to. If that's what everyone wants, I'll obviously put it in there. I don't think.
Well, is that a friendly amendment, Valerie? And Ed has his thumb up, so
I'm not even sure what the amendment is at this point.
Valerie, do you want to articulate that?
If we're talking a whereas clause, I'll put it in the whereas clause.
Well, Ed sounds like he's okay with putting that in the resolution, but I don't know if that's what Valerie is suggesting or not.
But I think we're going down the wrong path if we're getting into the methodology and questioning inputs into the model. I think it's.
But why? The whole model is based on the way it did the study. Their analysis, which, by the way, at a university, studies are suspect when they're paid for by the entity that stands to gain from a particular result of a study. And here, the MTA commissioned it, paid for it, and it's not suspect at all. But that's besides the point. Valerie has raised, other people have raised issues with their methodology. And if they are implementing a revenue producing plan based on certain assumptions based on what they knew at the time, then why not just ask what those assumptions are or what kind of impact they may have had on the results that they're looking at?
I think we're talking about two different things here.
I guess so. Maybe I'm.
We could agree to disagree on that.
No. I don't want to agree to disagree. I mean, which is fine. Normally, I don't know what Valerie is asking for, and I don't know what point you're making, and I guess I'm just confused. So my apologies, and if I'm speaking out of turn, I apologize for that as well. I just don't know what the issue is right now.
Right. I think the distinction I'm trying to make is, I'm not to discount that I think it's known that with environmental assessments, you're often going to get the outcomes that the agencies are seeking. But I think in this case, I can vouch for the model that they use and know that it's a federally funded transportation planning agency that is not looking to cook the books, if you will, and to come up with predetermined outcomes. The model is the model. It's a federally recognized model that's used for purposes just as this, and that I think it's different to question the validity of the findings based off of changes that have occurred from the time that the model was used to develop the data for and findings of the EA versus questioning whether all the correct information and correct assumptions and projections are going into the model to start with.
Okay, but I don't think anyone is saying that. although there is an implicit questioning of studies that agencies pay for, but that the data that they're relying on may very well be, and there are a lot of people who seem to have expressed this, outdated because it was pre-COVID, it was pre-bike lanes, it was pre-hospital expansions, it was pre-changes in the way people are working now. And so their data, and it's not a minor change that they're trying to do. We've all talked about how sweeping an effect this would have on people and businesses all around New York City. So I mean, I don't know, why is it that we're asking, or we're being requested to ask in a resolution for what they've looked at or what they considered in making these analyses? I'm not even sure where we are, so I'll just be quiet.
And that's where I think we're getting off topic. I think we should keep it as simple as possible so that.
Well, let's get clarity. Ed's waving his hand. Let's just get clarity from Ed on what the resolution is before we jump to Michelle's calling the question and a vote.
Yeah. No one's, I'm not, the essence of my resolution was not to call into question the professionally accepted premise for modeling and all that that's not what I'm getting at. What I'm getting at is the data set that they use, and that it's incorrect. It's not it's like if we were in stats class in grad school, doing the regression analysis. It's not the software we're using to do the regression analysis that I'm questioning, which would be the model that you're talking about, Craig, on the EAs that they use ubiquitously around the country. I'm talking about the data that you're putting in to the software to do the modeling. And that's what Valerie's nodding about. That's what I'm talking about here. It's the infirmities of that. It's the staleness. If we were cooking, they would review this as stale food because the ingredients were 5 years old, right? We use 5-year-old lettuce, so if for the salad, that's sort of what we're complaining about here. So I think that's the distinction. I just wanted to make that clear about what the resolution was that I proposed. And I hope that's what Alita was talking about. And I saw Valerie nodding. And I think that's what she was getting at. It wasn't the model itself. It was the ingredients, all the infirmities, the anecdotal evidence, the witnesses, the traffic, all that. Anyway, I'll stop. Yeah, Michelle, I'll let Michelle call the question.
Ed, could you just clarify so we all know what the resolution is exactly?
Yeah, so the resolution is to ask for the CBA to ask our elected officials, as we laid them out, the state assembly, incoming and current assembly and state senators that touch our district, to ask them to re-examine the law that created this congestion pricing, toll structure plan, whatever it may be, whatever law it was, whatever year it was, to go back and look at it and to tweak it to correct the unintended consequences that have been discovered in closer examination, to update stale data that was used as a premise for the policy objectives that are laid out in the law, right? The traffic studies Judy pointed out, pre-COVID, post-COVID, and to take into account all of those things, maybe in a post-COVID world now, right? And as people keep talking about this game-changing thing, maybe that's it, and to but to the essence of it is to ask our elected officials to go back to the law so that we're not handcuffed. That's the point. Because Craig and a lot of people pointed out rightly, we can't do anything. It's a done deal. The law's been passed. So that's my essence of my resolution, is to get to the heart of that. That's it, is to go back and to change the law, look at the law, amend it, make tweaks, correct it, make it better, or say, maybe we need to sunset it and do away with it, come up with something else. I don't know.
So I'll wordsmith it a little, but right now I have Community Board Aid Manhattan calls upon elected officials in Albany to look at and examine in this upcoming state legislative session, the congestion pricing law that was enacted in the 2019 budget law, and amend it as necessary to make it more just and to account for unintended consequences inherent in the wording of the current law and to address findings that may be outdated.
Yeah, I mean, I think and maybe Craig, we could work on something that to put in some more examples. I think that make it a little clearer for people. I think I see Michelle nodding because it's a little amorphous that way. Not that I don't agree with sort of the generalities, but I think it would give people a little a better idea of what we're talking about, you know, why we're talking about these things. Like you were saying, I think a very good issue, hanging these gantries, you know, above 60th. Now, whether that's another intended consequence of going to 63rd, but whatever it is, it needs to be hashed out, and it wasn't. And that's the point, right? So maybe we put
But
in
that
some
should be,
examples.
with all due respect, that should be hashed out before we're voting on it.
No,
Unless you
no,
want
this
those
is
as
what-
whereas clauses.
No, this is exactly the point, Craig, is that this is the point of why we've had this meeting. I think people have made some very good points. I think they've pointed out the fact that the gentleman's talking about his garage on 60th. I think I made the point of you're getting told going south of 59th there to go to Queens. The gentleman who lives on 58th, his garage is on 60th. I've heard this before, coming off the bridge at 60th, tolling all of the bridge or not the bridge. You've pointed that out. Whatever they may be, I think there are lots of infirmities we could use as examples. I just think the general language that you have is just that. It's a little too general.
Yeah, but I think there are people that are uncomfortable voting on something general in terms of the resolution, what we're calling for, and then that gets filled in later on. I think that needs to be specified now before it gets voted on. Otherwise, they should be included in the whereases and then.
Right. Well, that's what I'm saying. That's why I'm saying include it now. Right. Include it now. That's why Michelle's nodding. Right. Include it now.
So
That's what I'm saying.
So then this needs to be expanded before we vote on it.
Right.
So
Talking about the same thing.
Ed, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, you're saying that we need to change the therefore community board 8's requests beyond what I said, that we need to specify certain.
No, all I'm saying, Craig, is this is what you had is whereas the community board 8 asks our elected officials fill in the blank, okay, state senators, assembly members, new, current, those are going to be there in this current upcoming session, ask them to re-examine state law, whatever it is, L 2019, fill in the blank, okay, the budget law that created congestion pricing, asking them to
amended is necessary.
to examine, to re-examine, okay, not tell them what to do per se, but have them re-examine and amend if necessary, the law to correct any unintended consequences that they've discovered were not meant, or however you want to phrase it, okay, unintended, you know, things that I don't know, but I would like to, if we could just unintended consequences or any unintended consequences as a result of the law, or I don't know.
Yeah, no, that's basically what I had. So
yeah, no, yeah, go ahead, Michelle.
So if I call the question on the resolution, I would like to call it including certain whereases, alluding to what Ed is talking about, but these whereases would list the things that were not in effect or in existence at the time the law was written. So it could be, for example, whereas we have an open restaurants program now that did not exist at that time, whereas we have an extended network of bike lanes that didn't exist at that time, and those are the kinds of things where, and Ed is nodding, so he's accepting that. And we can take those whereases from our conversation tonight, whereas there has been extensive additional construction in the hospital corridor, whereas there are proposed and currently being developed residential real estate high towers. I mean, blah, 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 blah. And Ed is nodding. So it's taking the general, but it's pointing them in the direction as to what we're talking about. We're not saying that this is no good because of the open restaurants or because of the bike lanes. We're not saying that. We're only asking them to revisit it because none of this was in place at the time they passed the law.
Right.
Not to mention the fact that commuting into the Midtown corridor has been altered because of COVID. So if we could get a bunch of those in the whereases, and then the therefore be it resolved is that Community Board 8 is therefore requesting that the state legislature re-examine the law as was voted on in the year 2019 with a fresh eye looking at blah, 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 and you're good at wording. So does that about encapsulate it?
I think that
Ed?
actually helps.
And in that case, because I think we've about finished the conversation on this and we've got to get moving, if everybody accepts that kind of framework, that's what I'm calling the question on. Ed has accepted it.
Craig and Alita, if I may, Judy has a point of information. Judy, confirm on meeting.
Well, it was a point of information until Helena, Michelle just made her last comments that there didn't appear to be any whereases. I would just also like to add a whereas, also, if you could, Craig, about the use of not tolling the upper level at 62nd and comes off the bridge at 62nd and 63rd, whereas if there is no toll there, the traffic volume will increase dramatically.
Maybe Judy,
I think that should be another resolution.
Yeah, that's what
I don't think
what I
that
was
belongs
going
in
to
this one.
suggest.
Because that's a specific recommendation, and here we're asking them to look back because of what has happened.
Okay,
And-
I
and,
go along
you know.
with that. I go along with that as a separate resolution. Maybe after Ed's resolution, we
Okay.
can.
After the vote, but
Let's
I
vote
would-
on that
Right.
one, and then I have another resolution
Well,
as well.
Can
But
I,
wait
can
a
I just,
second, because I wanted to ask, am I allowed to ask if Ed would accept a friendly resolution or friendly amendment, which is that we ask for an updated environmental assessment?
You're never going to get that in
yeah,
time.
I think,
I mean, another environmental assessment will take another 4 years. I mean, it's never going to happen. I don't think you need it.
I would agree with Michelle. And thank you, Michelle. I think that actually helps quite a bit focus this.
Okay.
So the question has been called. Is there a
Right.
second?
Is there anyone who objects to calling? Is there a second to calling the question?
Sahar has
I
raised
think
her hand.
Mohit also and Sahar, or unless Sahar is raising her hand. No. Okay, then does anyone object to calling the question? Okay, so I see Evelyn still has her hands up. We're going to need to vote on this, Evelyn, so you'll need to wait, and Saida will lower your hand for the purposes of this vote, so we have all the board members together. Okay, then everyone opposed?
Well, let me just make sure that I've called, that I have the roll correct right now.
Yeah, that's a good idea, Craig.
All right. It is myself, Alita, Michelle, Ed, Judy, Mohit, Sahar, Sandrea, and Valerie.
Is there anyone else here who's on the board? If you are, just raise your hand, but I don't see anybody. Okay. Then if there's anyone who is opposed, abstaining, or not voting for cause, please raise your hand. Saida, if you want to take it from here.
Sure. As Alita said, if anybody is opposed, voting no, abstaining, not voting for cause, please raise your hand. Okay, Craig.
I am voting no on this.
Saida, would you count it up, please?
Sure, 1 second.
It's 8-1.
Okay, thank you, Craig.
I believe.
Judy has her hand raised.
Right, Judy?
Can I put a motion on the floor, or I don't know?
Yes.
I'm
Yes,
not good at wording this, so Craig, if you want to do it, about I think this, leaving this one piece of the 63rd Street Bridge is a very bad solution to this congestion pricing. I think, whereas Community Board 8 should look more closely at tolling the upper level of the bridge in conjunction with the rest of the bridge. How would you word it?
you don't mean CB8 looking at it, you mean the,
I mean, the MTA, excuse me, should look at, based on current traffic and volume. I don't know if you want to get into saying about, again, what we just said in the resolution, that the study is outdated or stale. I mean, I'll let you word it. You know what I want to say.
so you're calling for tolling or something for parity between the
Yes.
59th Street Bridge and the other bridges and tunnels that will be tolled.
The other entrances and exits on the bridge, calling for parity with that,
Okay.
because they're all tolled. And I
Okay.
think leaving
as
one
that's-
untold is going to contribute greatly to the traffic problems in the East 60s, considering that we have all the traffic coming off the FDR Drive at 63rd Street, and that could be part of it.
Okay. Is there a second? Michelle raised her hand.
But she's shaking her head.
Oh, so you just want to speak. Is there, before you do, Michelle, is there a second here, anyone?
I'll second it.
No. All right. Here's what I wanted to comment on. I don't think the rest of the bridge is tolled. You mean that the rest of the bridge brings traffic into the congestion pricing zone, and the exit north to 62nd and 63rd Street does not bring the traffic into the congestion pricing zone.
Correct.
And therefore, I don't think it's equity to toll them. I understand your rationale that it's going to make people go north because they won't have to face a toll. But the toll is not on the bridge. The toll is for entering the zone. And if you're going to end up on 63rd Street, you're not entering the zone. So it's not equity to toll people for doing that. So I would be opposed to this. I mean, it's unfortunate that the traffic is going to get routed and all that, but that's the nature of this entire program. That if you're coming over the 59th Street Bridge and you're going to go either west on 60th or make a left turn and go south on 2nd, you will be in the congestion pricing zone. Therefore, you will be tolled. If you come over the bridge and you come over the upper roadway and you exit at the 62nd, 63rd Street exit, you will not be in the zone, and therefore you will not be tolled. So it's not equity to toll everybody, because it's not the bridge that you're tolling, it's the street. So I would oppose this resolution.
Well, then toll the street, for that matter.
You are tolling the street. What
Right.
you
Well,
mean is
that's what
toll
I'm
the
saying.
bridge. No. What the street is what's being tolled. What you mean is you want to see the bridge tolled, and that's a different resolution.
Well, that's a different resolution and it's a different issue.
Right.
I'm very happy to see the bridge tolled. We've been fighting that for years.
Okay, but that's
know
not
how
your
the
resolution.
No, but I'll be happy to make that resolution. I don't know how the other board members, if they just shake their heads or if they think I'm nuts. No, you're not for it, Michelle. But anybody else, just shake your head, yes or no? Okay, I guess not. I guess I'm just me and Craig. are the only ones. But I mean, I just don't think it's fair, and I think it's going to put a really undue burden on 60th Street. That's why on 63rd and 62nd, that's why I wanted it in the whereas of the other resolution for them to look at that and the burden that it would put on those streets. I know
Well,
we
but
already
it-
voted.
I agree it's going to leave, I agree it's going to put a burden on it. I agree with you. But I think you're going to have a burden. I mean, the nature of this program is that it's creating burdens. But to say that you want, even though you're exiting the bridge and you're not in the zone, just because other people that are exiting into the zone, therefore you should be told anyway. I mean, that doesn't make any sense. I agree with you, it's going to increase traffic there, but that's exactly what's happened in 1,000 places all over the city and will continue to. So I would be in opposition to this resolution. You're advocating tolling people where they're not in the zone.
I'm not sure actually what Judy is asking for in the resolution. So Judy, if you could clarify.
Well, that's what she asked for.
Well, I was asking for a toll on the street. I would also change the resolution to toll the whole bridge, but I know that's another big fight and we're not going there and it isn't going to happen. And that's a big fight between all the board members.
You clarify then, Judy, what
I wanted in the prior resolution is that when they looked at their studies, because for them to say that they wouldn't make any difference in the traffic volumes, their study, and that's just not so. The traffic volume in 62nd, 63rd Street is going to increase tremendously. That's why I wanted it as a whereas in the other resolution. But you all said to put it as a separate resolution. Valerie and Ed have something to add. I'm not good with resolutions.
I know, I just want to know exactly what you're asking for.
Well, if they're not going to toll the bridge, then I think they need to toll the street from that entrance and into the city. That's what I was asking for.
So leave the FDR, leave an exit from the bridge to the FDR drive.
Leaving one exit untold on the street will lead to heavier congestion in the 60s.
No, I understand that, but then the exception rather that they wanted, which was going from the bridge to the FDR drive north, would leave people untold for that. And that is not part of your resolution.
No. Because I just think about, I know people who live on 63rd Street from York Avenue all the way up to 2nd, and all we ever get is complaints about the traffic and the horn honking and the noise that we have now. And if that becomes the way for everybody from Long Island to get into the city without paying, these people are going to go out of their minds. It's just going to be unbearable to live on 63rd Street.
So I just want to, and I'm not entirely clear as to what the definition is as per the law, but in the environmental assessment, they refer to as defined by this, I'm reading this, this is in a footnote, as defined by the MTA Reform and Traffic Mobility Act. That would be, I believe, the enacting language. The Manhattan Central Business District consists of the geographic area of Manhattan south of and inclusive of 60th Street to the extent practicable, but does not include the FDR Drive and West Side Highway. Now, I guess from Judy, to your point, when we are talking about entering the congestion zone and entering Manhattan, does it necessarily have to mean the roadway network on the street, or could that be because the bridge is below 60th Street and you're in Manhattan on the bridge, that your language actually conforms to their definition here of inclusive of 60th Street?
Yes, well, so you could put the toll on the bridge before they come down the ramp. And then you would be at 60th Street if you placed it properly on the bridge, the toll. It would go on the bridge. It wouldn't go on the street.
Right. But that just speaks to how it can be done if we
That's a
were to.
technicality. Ed is, please call on Ed.
Well, we just wanted clarity of what you're asking.
Well,
for.
Yeah,
maybe,
no, you hang the gantry, to Judy's point. You hang the gantry on the left side. That's how you get around that problem, because the bridge spills out onto 60th. If anybody's driven on the bridge, Judy's
Now, wait a
point
minute.
is your point. I drive the lower because First Avenue is a mess now. So I come up Third Avenue out of Queens. I used to go, you go on the lower roadway, you had two options. It's like Password with Alan Ludden and Betty White. You get the pass or play there. You can either get off early, right? And you go down that little ramp, right? You go there by Sapphire now, and you go down and you
But
go
I'm
towards
not
the
talking
drive.
about, Ed,
Or
you're
but
on
you're-
the
No,
wrong ramp.
no, Judy, please let me finish. Judy, let me.
Hang on, before you're discussing what Judy's asking for, and I think you were muted. Hang on, because Judy's asking for something. That's just what we need to focus on before the vote. And then you could say what it is. I'm not sure you're being responsive to her. And I don't want to cut you off either. Could you unmute him,
also,
Saida, please?
Ed
Please.
is talking about
You're
the
muting me before I can even finish. So of course
I
I'm
know,
not
well, she just
responsive.
muted you, so you're okay. Go ahead.
Ed, before you finish, I'm talking about the upper level. I'm not talking about where you're talking about where you come off at 60th. I'm talking about the upper level where you come off
I know you are.
2nd and 63rd.
I understand that. I understand that, Judy. I do that one as well. That's a mess. I would never do that one. You got to, that's like Costanza on the LIE going to Kennedy. It's a suicide mission. You go the lower. But anyway, just forget that. It's 62nd Street. You're still getting told. My point is, you don't want to toll the bridge. You want to capture the people who are coming in over the bridge and going into the zone. To me, the only place you hang the gantry, this was my point, is that you hang the gantry on the left side on the lower roadway, so that the only people being captured by the gantry are those people coming on the lower roadway, not the upper roadway, into Manhattan, going below 60th Street, which is how you read the resolution, the law, as Craig said. That's how you would capture it. But you don't want to toll the people on the bridge. But in terms of getting people, I see you waving, Michelle, but I see, in terms of people being moved up to 62nd and 63rd, shopping upper or lower roadway. Yeah, I mean, that's the point of the whole resolution before, is that these are the unintended consequences. For me, this is part of the unintended consequences of this whole thing. I don't know. That's not what Michelle's talking about.
And
and
Valerie
do we have a
also
second?
has her hand up.
Be clear, do we have
Valerie?
a second on Judy's resolution?
So can I just, to go to Judy's point, I understand Michelle is absolutely right. You can't toll people for not going into the zone. Because that's the post, you got to have an off ramp into this. That's not
right.
But I think though, but Judy's point is that that's pushing everybody onto 63rd Street and onto 60th Street because they don't want to pay. So
Right.
isn't the right answer that the bridge shouldn't be tolled at all? That it should be
You're
at
not tolling the
59th
bridge.
Street when you turn into the zone?
But you're not tolling the bridge because
Michelle's waving also.
Well, but this way you give the maximum amount of cars to come out and make a decision, and you don't push them all onto one street. I mean, that's the creation of the congestion.
Let me just clarify this. Right now, as
I was
currently,
unmuted.
as
Jeff,
currently,
hang on a second, because I don't know, I'm not sure what we're talking about. I don't even know if there's been a second to Judy's.
There hasn't, there
motion.
wasn't.
I-
Oh,
I-
yes,
I
Craig
seconded it.
Correct.
Okay.
No,
And-
I'm
can I
sorry,
please
Craig,
just
let me
try to
just,
provide some clarity here? Right now, the
Go ahead,
current proposal is essentially technically following exactly the manner in which you would achieve the inclusive of 60th Street goal, meaning that any vehicle that lands in Manhattan on the Queensboro Bridge that takes the lower level will land at 60th Street or below, and thus is assessed the fee. And if you are on the upper level, you exit onto either 62nd or 63rd Street, and you do not get tolled until you were to cross below 61st Street. So that's the current proposal as presented in the environmental assessment. So the two things we're talking about here, as far as I understand from the discussion, are either moving the toll below 60, the gantries, and changing the language from inclusive of 60th Street to south of 60th Street, and therefore you would set up the bridge gantries so that you're only getting, so that there wouldn't need to be gantries on the bridge. There would be, or unless you were making that left turn onto 2nd Avenue, as Ed suggested. Or you keep it as is, where you have no gantries on the upper level, and you only get told when you cross the boundary south. So those are, I think, the two options that we're playing around with right now. As is, which conforms to the law, meaning inclusive, or change the language so it's south of 60th Street. Or if Judy's proposal is toll the bridge, that's the third option.
Well, that's tolling the bridges, although that is something that Barry and I would like to see, and all the other bridges coming into the city, but that isn't going to happen. And we'll have such a fight at the community board, it'll go on for hours. So I think tolling the bridge is not an option to be considered tonight. We have enough on our plate without that.
Well, we need one option. We can't, I believe, have.
Okay, so let's hear from Michelle and Valerie and everybody else, and maybe I'll withdraw the motion and we'll move on.
Well, no, I'm only asking for one motion to do.
Alita, Judy made the motion. When I described it, she nodded. That's the motion. We have repeated it 400 times.
Okay, well, Craig was
So
talking
unless
about-
you're changing the motion.
I'm not, but Craig raised.
No,
3
no,
plus
I
4
heard
or
what
do
Craig
3.
said, which was changing Judy's motion. Judy's motion is that she wants equity, that when you come over the bridge, no matter where you exit, you should face the congestion zone toll. Now, I did not second that. I am opposed to that. Are there inequities? Absolutely. Will it cause congestion on 63rd Street? Absolutely. Just like all of this is going to do. Just like if you put the zone starting at 59th, you'll have a buildup at 60th. If you started at 61st, you'll have a buildup at 60th. I mean, that's the nature of this whole thing. But if I am correct as what Judy is saying, I'd like to call the question on what she is saying. And unless you're going to withdraw it, that's up to you. But
Now,
if that's
Michelle, before you do that, Valerie's had her hand up as long
okay,
as-
fine. But
I think
let's
we
not
need
keep going around as to what the
No, after
resolution
Valerie.
is. That's the
Wait a second.
resolution.
I think that is Judy's motion. I mean, I think I don't want to talk anymore because I'm sorry, Judy, I'm gonna have to vote against that because we need to have a place for people to come off Midtown on 60th Street and avoid the having to pay the toll. So that's why I have to vote against it. So unless you want to withdraw the motion or think about it more, I mean, it's not something that we really have to do tonight. So I just want to give you the option.
Okay, so why don't I withdraw the motion tonight? And Craig, maybe you and I will talk about this a
Okay,
little
but-
bit off screen. And then at the next meeting, we'll come back. I really would have liked to have seen it as one of the whereases for the motion we did pass for them to be looking at. But since we didn't do that, I'm going to withdraw the motion and we'll maybe come back to it at the next meeting.
Was one of your options, Judy, just moving the boundary south of the northern side of
That
60?
wasn't in the resolution, Alita.
No,
That's a different
Asking her-
conversation.
Michelle, I'm asking her because Craig raised it, other people raised it, if that was something that she was considering. That's all. All she has to do is say no if she's not.
No, that was not in my motion.
Fair enough. Good. Okay. So then do
No,
we?
I'm not withdrawing the motion.
Okay, so then Valerie and Michelle, do you have comments well, then there's nothing on the table right now.
Well, absolutely.
But I have another resolution.
Okay, well, Valerie had her hand raised
No, no,
first.
no, I
Okay.
just wanted, I'm done.
Okay, then lower your hand, please. Michelle,
Okay,
go.
sorry.
Thank you. You're muted. Could you unmute Michelle, please?
So
Thank
I'd like to make a resolution that we ask the state legislature to include in their congestion pricing plan a timeline and a process by which they will evaluate its success and evaluate whether or not it has attained the goals that they had in mind. Because and if it's seconded, I'll speak to it, just that they have some kind of off ramp. Okay, Judy seconded. So to me, this is obvious. Like when you do a program, you have to evaluate it to see if it's working. And there is nothing in this that I know about that calls for them to evaluate the program. So number one, I'm calling for them to evaluate the program within a certain time frame. Now,
Can I actually, before you go on, read from you the law, because it does actually talk about reporting?
okay,
Beginning 1 year after the operation date and every 2 years thereafter, the Triborough Bridge and Tunnel Authority, in consultation with the City Department of Transportation, shall report on the effect of Central Business District tolling program on traffic congestion in and around the Central Business District and on mass transit use and taxi and for-hire vehicle use, including vehicle miles traveled for each trip within the Central Business District for taxis and for-hire vehicles. The current and historic volume and types of vehicles, including but not limited to commercial trucks, transportation network companies, Uber and Lyfts, taxis, private cars, and tour buses entering the Central Business District, environmental improvements, and then they list the types, congestion reduction measures, and transit ridership and average bus speeds within the Central Business District, and on all receipts and expenditures related to the tolling program. The Department of Transportation of New York City shall be required to assist in gathering and providing to the Triborough Bridge and Tunnel Authority traffic impact data and other related data. The report shall be readily available to the public and posted on the authority's website and submitted to the governor, director of the budget, and others.
okay, that's great, Craig. And so what I would say, I would point to that. What is it? Article this, page that, whatever it is.
Section 1706 of Vehicle and Traffic, Chapter 71, Title 8, Article 44C.
Okay, so what I would say is with reference to that, because what's missing from there is what I would like to add. And if after their examination, they find that the program has not met either its congestion, pollution, or monetary goals, that the program be under consideration to be rescinded, because that's what they're missing there. They're talking about they're going to do all this review and review and review, but what's going to happen if they don't meet their goals? They don't put that in there. And I'll give you an example about the plazas with that. When they put the plazas in on Broadway, they were supposed to be temporary. They were done in the Bloomberg administration. And Liz Kruger, subsequent to them being put in, she asked a year or two later for an evaluation, which was promised because it was supposed to be, they were supposed to be temporary until it was determined that they were a success. And so she asked for the data showing that they were a success, because the empirical data was that they were clogging traffic and that it was a nightmare. And of course, the whole concept of having beach chairs out there only was true in warmer weather and mainly used by tourists. She never got that data. That was turned down, and those plazas became permanent. I'm talking about the ones specifically in the 50s on Broadway, southbound. Anyway, so the reason I'm saying this is I think that they need an off-ramp. They have to say that these are our goals. And if after I don't know if 2 years is appropriate, 3 years is appropriate, or we don't even have to put a timeline in if that is controversial for this. So if everybody has a different concept about that, I'm happy to leave it out. But I think as an extension of that, it says, and if our goals in these 3 categories are not met, the program will be rescinded.
Is there a second? I'll second it, but I'd also like to make a friendly amendment, which is that we need metrics and we need a time frame, because if we don't have a time frame, they could say, we'll look at it in 30 years.
Absolutely. Now, do you want to put a time frame in the resolution? It's fine with me.
It's your resolution, so whatever.
Well, I was hesitant to do it because I was worried that it would hinder support, but I'm not sure it has support anyway, so maybe it doesn't matter. But it just seems to me that anything you implement and you're proposing to study, you're not just studying it for the benefit of your own, that if the metrics, if the program is not meeting its intended goals within 3 years, I'll say 3 years, assuming that things can get back maybe a little bit to normal in Midtown, and we'll know more about the open restaurants program and whatever reason, I'll say 3 years, that the legislature rescind the program.
I'd also like to, I guess, to add, because one of the things I wonder about is the impact on big business and whether businesses will stay in the city if they're being told to do everything. And I'm wondering if there's a metric available to measure whether businesses are leaving the city.
Well, we can put that in when we say all the metrics. When we say if they haven't met their financial goal, their pollution goal, their congestion goal, and if it is seen to cause businesses to relocate, that be one of the metrics. But I think it's not enough to put in that whole big section and then not say what the consequence is. Oh, we're going to look at it, and we're going to keep looking at it, and we're going to keep looking at it, and we're going to have all these terrific metrics. But then what? If you're not earning the amount of money you want to earn, if congestion hasn't been improved, if whatever, then then you have to have an off-ramp. Then you have to say, okay, then I'm not going to do it anymore. I mean, otherwise you're banging your head against the wall. So I think we have to have that.
I would just suggest that you try to flesh out a little more when referring to how you measure the loss of businesses, because there could be different metrics. If you're talking
That's
about
true, and that's for them.
A net loss, or because there are always going to be, you're always going to find reports of businesses that may respond negatively to this and may say they're leaving. There may be other businesses that are going to be more inclined to come here or expand because of improved conditions, at least as they may perceive.
So Craig, to your point, a good point. So we can say, or any other metric deemed, you don't have to mention business. I think it's clear enough. First of all, that whole paragraph included a ton of things. I think it's really enough. But the whole point is that if they sought to include that, then they have to have an end game. And you could make a resolution that if all those things actually turn out to be in favor, that therefore we're keeping it, which is what they're going to do. But they never say that if it doesn't meet their requirements, that they're going to terminate the program. So I think it's broad enough where we don't have to mention business, because if we mention business, we can say residency. And if we mention residences, we can say restaurant. I mean, we don't have to say all that. We can say, and all other metrics. I mean, that covers it pretty much. And that's for them to gather the metrics. They're the ones that are gathering all the metrics. They're the ones who claim to be so good at it. We can evaluate that for them. But if they have if they're claiming to look into this, then they must have a methodology to look into it. Certainly the finances should be easy to measure.
So you're essentially saying congestion, pollution, financial goals, and any other metrics being.
Yes, if unsuccessful, then the program is terminated. That's all. It's
Okay.
just saying if it doesn't work, stop it. I mean, I don't know how the legislature could disagree with that since this is their paragraph. I mean, what's the other thing?
I would think that if anything, the 3 years would be the hardest thing to.
Well, that's why I was hesitant to put a year on it. You know, but it is true that we don't want it 30 years. I don't want them to be examining this for 30 years. In other words, if within the first, you want to say 5 years, we could say within the first 3 to 5 years, their goals have not been met, then terminate the program. Otherwise, you know, what's the definition of insanity? You keep doing the same thing over and over again, you know, with the same terrible result. Makes no sense. 3 to 5 years is broad enough.
Okay.
Moet? You're
3
unmuted.
years sounds a little tight to me, but 5 is, I think, a reasonable place to go with this.
Okay.
Michelle, would you be willing to accept 5 years in your resolution?
In other words, instead of 3 to 5 years? Is that what I didn't understand what you meant.
I mean, I would prefer just a 5, but 3 to 5 is probably okay too.
Okay, then I would prefer 3 to 5, if that's okay.
Okay. Yeah.
And let me just ask another question that comes to my mind. And that is, what if it met some of the goals and not other goals? And this is where I wonder if there is a potential divergence that could exist based off of what your personal priorities may be, if you know what I mean. Because there are some people that may accept not meeting the congestion goals, but it meets its financial goals to fund improvements to the transit system. There are some people who may be disappointed if it doesn't meet the monetary goals, but reduces congestion and improves air quality. So
I think it's an excellent point. I don't think we have to deal with it in this resolution. I think when it comes in front of the legislature, all we're doing is saying they set up all these parameters. If the parameters are not met, terminate, and they can decide and make it known that this parameter was met and that one wasn't, and let them argue it out among themselves. We can't plan for every single contingency, but we do have to give them a framework to stop this if all or any of it is unsatisfactory. And that's within their judgment. I don't think it has to be that specific.
okay.
So somebody want to call the question? Because we have a whole other topic to get to.
Judy, it looks like Judy wants to call a question.
Judy,
Okay.
confirm unmuting.
Yes, I'll call the question.
Okay, I second calling the question.
Is there any objection to calling the question? Okay, then Said, if you'd lower Michelle's hand and take it from here.
Okay, so I'm just going to read out the names of everyone present. We have Alita, Craig, Michelle, Ed, Judy, Mohit, Sahar, and Sandrea, and Valerie.
Valerie looks like she has a coffee cup or
She
something.
does have a coffee cup away, indicating she's away. So if anybody, I guess, is voting no, abstaining, or not voting for cause, you can raise your hand.
I am voting no on this one.
Okay.
I guess when Valerie gets back, she could give you her vote because,
If she wasn't here for the discussion, she can't vote, Michelle.
oh, I
don't-
thought she was.
I don't know when she left. We
Oh,
can
okay.
ask her when she left.
All right, well, it doesn't matter. Okay. So it looks like it passed anyway.
7-1.
Okay, then the next item on the agenda. I'd like to just start by saying that they hired a Nashville company, TransCore, to do the administration and to provide, I think, to provide the physical infrastructure for it at a cost of $507 million contract. They were engaged in 2019. Does anyone know anything about the process of soliciting, if they did, proposals from anyone? Because my understanding is that TransCore has not operated in a city the size of New York or a city at all like this. They've not done this before. Looking at their website, they consider 60th Street to be Lower Manhattan. So I'm not sure how familiar they are with the city. And a cost of $507 million for a 7-year contract. So I don't know how transparent they were, but that's an issue that that I noticed. If we want to start with that, the procurement process. Okay, Michelle, you have your hand up.
Yeah. Oh, I'm unmuted. Okay. Yeah, I think we should look at that. And of course, I mean, I don't know if they examined the whole United States and Canada and Mexico for the best company. But I think that if they had requests out, for proposals, that we should have known about that.
Yeah. According to a news article, by the way, sorry to interject, there were 3 bidders for that contract. So it was a competitive bid.
And do we know anything about those? Well, we're not going to litigate that here, but here are the questions that I would ask about those bidders, since these people have never worked in a city. So I would just be interested to know what the qualifications were or the background or experience was, just to make sure that they didn't get the job because it's somebody's cousin, which we know happened with a restaurant in Central Park, and being the relative of somebody that came, and they came from Pennsylvania for this. So, I mean, I won't go into it, it's obvious. But the other thing I wanted to say, and I think we should ask, to the extent that we are able to ask, I don't know if the right word is audit, probably not, probably the right word is an accounting, but there's been, to the extent that this issue has been in the news, it's been in the news about the inefficiency of the MTA. There have been any number of articles about how they handle money. Now they're exploring whether there should be no fares on the buses and trains. There should be no fares. They're examining all these things and claiming that they need money, but yet they're willing to do away with fares. It's almost like they're giving in to the turnstile jumpers. Rather than enforce the crime, they'll just eliminate the crime. And to my mind, that's the whole question in this area, is an examination of the MTA and holding them accountable. Now, I'm not sure, Craig, you would know better, what we are entitled and what we're like to ask for and what we're likely to get an answer about. Or can we ask the controller's office to do an audit of the MTA? Or no, that you can't. The controller's the city. I'm sorry, but can we ask the state to do an audit?
Well, what I would actually,
has there been an audit? Sorry.
Well, let me answer that question. Saida, if you don't mind going back to the presentation that I had put together. So let me just tell you which page to go on.
I think we were
Craig
on
is looking
18.
into that. Well,
Yeah,
Craig is
so
looking into that.
if you go to actually the last page,
Oh, okay.
because this may actually help. And I don't know this is going to completely satisfy what you're asking for, Michelle, but as part of that budget bill that included congestion pricing, the MTA was legislatively required to conduct an independent comprehensive forensic audit. And the audit results are posted on the MTA's website. On here, I have the link to the website where you could pull up the report. It notes the deficiencies that were found and recommendations as to how the MTA should be addressing those.
They were auditing themselves?
No, they hired an independent
So-
firm to conduct that audit.
Of what part of this? Because the Daily News had a big article a couple months ago about the MTA with respect to East Side Access. That's what's bringing the Long Island Railroad to Grand Central, is that they maintain 3 sets of books, one for its internal people involved with running that project. Another was for the federal government that was putting billions into it. And a third was for its board of directors and the public. And as we know, all of the members of the Transit Mobility Review Board are somehow connected with the MTA board. So I'm not really sure if they did an audit and it came out okay, what to make of all of that, given that the federal government has raised questions about its expenditures of COVID monies too, as in where is all of the money? Plus, we've been paying an extra congestion pricing fee on taxis for years. Where is that money? Does
Well,
I mean, you know, Craig, I don't know.
No, I think, no, you're raising fair points. I think I'm just calling out the fact that there has been some work that's done. I think
So did
we
the
have to
audit
separate.
answer these questions? Did the audit, you've seen the audit, did it answer these questions?
Well, these questions didn't necessarily relate to specific projects and how projects were managed or mismanaged. But this is looking forward in terms of, as it relates to congestion pricing, how the future capital plans are going to have to be addressed to deal with the findings of this forensic audit going forward that would ostensibly improve upon the management of the MTA's projects as compared to what had been done in the past, where they found all these shortcomings.
So let me just understand, Craig. So that's from 2020 to 2024, that's going forward. But have they accounted, because this was a forensic audit, have they accounted accounted for anything that was problematic and or explained it? Because there's a lot of MTA money that can't be accounted for.
Right, and I'm not suggesting that this looked at everything. I'm just saying, I just want to point out that some work has been done to address some of these issues in the past. It's not necessarily comprehensive. It's not necessarily investigating things like East Side Access and some of those reports that are out there.
So in your mind, if you wanted, as a professional, if you wanted additional information, would you agree that we want additional and more comprehensive information? And if so, how would you word that to make that an actual possibility if we made such a request or had such a resolution?
I think well, I don't even know that I should be answering that question at that point, because I'm trying to understand the connection to congestion pricing here. I understand, don't get me wrong, I'm not doubting the purpose and intent of the discussion in general. It's a question of where this relates to what this task force should be doing.
Well, but the premise of why they're having congestion pricing is to raise money for the MTA. If the
For
MTA,
the capital, right, for the capital plan,
right,
which is why I brought up the forensic audit.
right. So, but if the MTA, if the MTA is found not to be handling monies in an appropriate way, or if there are some things that they should be doing differently before they become in charge of the new influx of monies, that's absolutely relevant to congestion pricing. We're voting to give them this big money stream.
The whole
And-
purpose of the plan is a revenue creating plan.
Right.
So I think it would be negligent, derelict in our duties if we didn't.
Not to question it, right?
Well, I think, but I guess where I'm going is, I think based on the congestion pricing law and the scope of what I personally think we should be looking at the task force is, we've talked about in the past whether there's a lockbox, what that means, and whether that's going to be sufficient to ensure that the funding doesn't go elsewhere. And
is there?
Yes. Well, I'll leave it to others to opine as to whether whether they believe that it's sufficient as currently constructed. And I have graphics in this slideshow showing the different funds, where they're coming from, and what makes up the lockbox. But and the language in the law related to it. But I don't know beyond that digging into what the MTA has done in the past that has clearly been mismanagement is really what our focus should be.
Well, let me make just two last points then. One is, to the extent that you put it on the agenda, means that on some level you find it relevant, because you are talking about transparency, accountability, and oversight. So to that extent, it's on the agenda for this committee. The other thing is the past is relevant, because it's based on the past that we're judging their reliability to handle this new influx of money. So we are not going to be doing a criminal investigation or any other kind. We're not hiring our own detectives here. But I think it's perfectly appropriate for this committee, and I've spoken, so I can't make a resolution, but to use this agenda item and turn it into a resolution that we can suggest some policy recommendations that would help with MTA transparency, accountability, and oversight. So we can, in this discussion, suggest some methodology that would help them with that. And to the extent that it's on the agenda and is perfectly relevant, I think we should try to do that tonight.
If we were talking just about an environmental or a relieving congestion scheme, it would maybe be different. But we're talking about a revenue producing scheme that will have a far-ranging impact, a financial impact on a lot of people in the city and the surrounding areas and elsewhere around the country too. If they drive in or come in and take taxis, we've heard concerns from a whole variety of businesses and enterprises and people. And so to say to the MTA, just take the money and there's no accountability, I think would not be right as a government agency for us. But I'll stop with that and let's go to Valerie.
I'm just wanted to ask Craig a question. What makes you think that there is a lockbox? Because when I was at the hearing in 2019, and the MTA came before us, they specifically said they didn't have a lockbox. Just historically, one of the reasons why the money for the Second Avenue subway was so screwed up was because they kept taking the funds that were earmarked, not lockbox, for the Second Avenue subway, and they were actually spending them on other projects. So did you see something in the legislation that says?
Yes, and in fact, Said, if you don't mind scrolling up about 6 pages or so, I could walk everyone through it. Okay, so I pulled these graphics here from the Citizens Budget Committee, so I have a link on here so people can see the graphics themselves. But this is basically a graphic depicting the different sources of funding that are going into the central business district tolling capital lockbox. So there is obviously the funds, the $1 billion per year from the Central Business District Tolling Program, i.e. congestion pricing. There's also a portion that's coming from the progressive real estate transfer tax. And then there's a portion coming from a sales tax intercept as well. And if you go to the next screen or the next set of screens, so the budget law, here's the direct language that there is a central business district tolling capital lockbox fund established to section 553J of the Public Authorities Law necessary to fund the $15 billion for the current capital plan and any additional revenues above that amount for successor programs, meaning future, the 25 to 29 capital plan, and so on and so forth. And if you go to the next screen, please, then I go into details, and this is the language pulled from section 553J. So this one I've highlighted in red, the establishment of the fund, how it should be kept separate from and should not be commingled with any other monies of the authority. The next slide, please. And this, I apologize, that's small. Then it basically talks about, I think here was the uses of it, and I'm not going to read this right now, but it describes it. Next slide, please.
Oh, that was pretty quick there.
Yeah, no, wait, but you could pull it up. It's posted on
Okay, all right. Okay.
On there. I'm trying not to dominate the discussion here.
No, I get it.
I'm sorry, Sayeda, go back one more because and then 3A here talks about the split 80% to New York City Transit, 10% to Long Island Railroad, 10% to Metro North. And then the next section is reporting on the expenditures. And yeah, that's basically it. But everyone's welcome to look at that. And I'm wondering whether it just makes sense for people to think about this, digest it a little, and then we come back and at our next meeting make this topic one, where we have more time to really debate this further and to figure out how we want to go about it.
I think we should continue discussions, but I have two questions. One question is, well, the Fed has been raising rates like crazy. So you go into your bank and instead of 0.65% interest, you could get almost 4% interest for a savings account. So how does that impact the revenue that they need to achieve in order to support bonds that they haven't even sold yet, because they're going to have to sell the bonds at a much higher rate to be competitive. So are they going to have to raise more than $1 billion? First of all, the $1 billion is net of costs. They're spending, I don't know, this is not my field, so I don't know, but $70 million a year for TransCore. That's almost 8% of the $1 billion they have to raise every year. So that's on top of the $1 billion is the $70 billion a year that they're paying to this entity. And frankly, it could be even more if it's an upfront kind of, if there's an advance or if they're paying everything upfront. I don't know, but we don't even know really, because of the very rapid rise in interest rates, what exactly the economics are going to be, because they have to support the bonds. It's not a flat out $1 billion a year. It's $1 billion for the 15 billion in bonds. Unless I really don't know this field, so maybe I'm just wrong about the whole thing.
Well, I think that's right, but the other part of the issue is let's not forget that this only represents the 15 billion that they're going to issue, regardless of the interest rate. And these are going to be tax-free municipal bonds. So it's a little bit different. But this only the 15 billion for the capital project represents, correct me if I'm wrong, only 30% of the money that they actually need to do the capital improvements. The congestion pricing and the tax scheme has never been represented as being a fully funded capital program by congestion pricing. It's not that big an amount, which I'll take a little editorial license here, which is why when the newest head of the MTA came in 2020 and 21, he said he didn't need it. because they had revenues from other sources.
Yeah, but that's,
I
I
get-
don't, that's not what he said. I saw him speak last month and
Right,
he,
because he had his head slapped when he said it, because everybody had already tried to sell this thing, and now he comes out and says, hey, we don't really need it. But the fact of the matter is, it's, even if you have congestion pricing, it does not guarantee these improvements, because it's not 100% funded by whatever they're going to raise. Be that as it may, I'm in favor of Craig's proposition that we take these great slides that he put together and have some time to look at them and put this as our number one topic. So I would make that motion.
Aida, could you email those slides to all of the people from the board who've attended this, or maybe everyone who's attended it, whose email addresses you have, so that we could look this over? I'd also like to make my last and final point that a lockbox in itself does not guarantee that they're going to be spending the money correctly or accounting for the money correctly. They're two separate things. One is money coming in and being secured, and the other one is money going out and being accounted for. And well, I'll just end there.
I think we need to read the language to have a better idea of that, to be honest.
Right. Yeah, I think reading the language would be helpful. I don't pretend that the financial element of this is my expertise, but I also want to just be clear. I'm not questioning anyone who's looking at a more expansive view of accountability and transparency. I was just trying to keep this focused on things that are directly related to congestion pricing and the congestion pricing legislation and the lockbox language, that when we talk about how the funds are going to be used, because you could have a whole task force focused on MTA accountability separate.
Yeah. Well, I think it's fair. The only other point I wanted to ask is, I think it's very fair. They have been collecting now this congestion pricing surcharge off the taxis for 3 years. And I know that if we go to either Kruger's office or somebody else's, they're supposed to keep tabs on how much they collect every single month.
I believe they do, and I believe that if you dig on the MTA website, because when I was putting things together,
during COVID, I was actually looking at the estimates versus what they were actually collecting, and they were seriously off, obviously, through then. But they're also, if you look back at your lockbox slide, and we can look at this the next time, look at the amount that's coming in through the MTA surcharge, which is on top of the congestion pricing surcharge in the taxi cab. And also, every time you go to a restaurant, and any sales tax, there's an MTA component in that. So, I mean, we're paying extra for the MTA every single day. And I think it also goes to the accountability, like, where is all that money going? And it just, makes you question, well, maybe we can but maybe we can have somebody come to sort of focus on that, or have somebody get us the data from what they've already collected, because I don't think they've been putting that money in the lockbox, the congestion pricing tax that they've been collecting for the last 3 years, almost 4 years now.
Well, and also, if they made such a mess of the East Side access that they had 3 sets of divergent books, then how do we know they're going to do any kind of credible job estimating costs and hiring the right people to run projects that they're going to use the money for? I think it's all connected. If they're taxing us, and as a revenue scheme they are, then I think we really do have a right to ask every step of the financial way here, from the lockbox and the way they get the money to how they spend it and who they're answerable to.
And I would further say that since we've been paying this congestion pricing surcharge on the taxis, at least for the people living between 96th Street and in the zone, we should get a rebate on any congestion pricing that we would be charged for the initial 3 to 4 years, because the idea was this was a temporary measure, because congestion pricing was supposed to come in less than a year. And that was one of the reasons we were told by the electeds to let it go, because the congestion pricing scheme, once it came in, the surcharge on the taxis would go away. So I think we're perfectly within our rights to ask for a rebate based on all of the taxes that have been collected in Manhattan from residents and, you know, on that alone.
We know I mean, they've told us that it's not going away, but a question that you just raised for me, Valerie, is that if we're paying all this money for taxis below 96th Street and 100 something on the west side, does that money count to the $1 billion revenue that they need from the
Well-
regular congestion?
Well, what have they been doing with it? I mean,
Yeah, well, what have they been doing with it till now? And what are they going to do with it? And how are they going to account for it? And what's it going to be included within? I mean, I have no idea.
well, I'm making a motion to adjourn.
Well, you can't yet. Hang on a second,
Fine.
because Ed and Michelle, let Ed and
Oh,
Michelle.
sorry, I apologize.
Thanks, Michelle. I mean, sorry, thanks, Valerie. And then well, we also have Evelyn with her hand up. So Ed, Evelyn, if you could just be patient, Ed.
No, well, we're getting these slides anyway. So I put my hand up a while back because I was,
Let's see.
the first slide Craig had, one of the first couple, there was an arrow going from the dedicated toll, but to the lockbox, but there was also an arrow going from that box to the Triborough Bridge and Tunnel Authority. And that was a question I had, but it's late and we're getting the slides anyway, and we're going to talk about this later. So we can talk about that later after we get the slides, right? Craig, you're sending that stuff to us?
I actually just put it in the chat. So if everybody just wants
Could you email it?
Sure.
Would you mind?
No.
Thank you, Saida.
Thank you.
And if you go to that Citizens Budget Committee site that's listed there, that will provide a better explanation as to everything and what the graphics actually mean. But essentially, the more complex one is referring to the $1 billion of revenue, but also how the tolling program is sending the funding to the TBTA to support the actual program operation and setup and cost, but meaning the congestion pricing program.
Yeah, well, I mean, we're going to talk about this later, though, right? I mean, this is
Yeah, well, this will be
in terms of the money, right?
yes.
It'll hopefully be number one on the agenda for.
Okay.
Yeah, no,
No,
whatever. I think we both agree that this will be
Right.
one on the next agenda.
Oh, good. Okay. Well, then I won't belabor the point then. That's all good then.
Unless we get a surprise visitor from someone who we all are eager to hear speak.
Yeah, no, 'cause I share the same view. Like, I don't trust the MTA with all this cash. Like, please.
So then everyone's homework is review section 553J and the lockbox language, and we can talk about any concerns we have next month.
But before we go, just Michelle and then Evelyn. If
Yeah, I just wanted to say, as part of our research, do we know if that Tennessee company was actually the lowest bidder? In other words, you said we had 3 bids. Were they the lowest bidder, or they were in the middle, or they were just the most qualified? What?
I don't know. I'm guessing in order to find out, you would have to file a freedom of information request. That's not something that generally would be just released and put out into the public realm. I do, just from my research, I'm not sure where the idea that TransCore is not necessarily qualified came from. I'm seeing that
they weren't qualified. I said that they didn't have any experience.
But they've been around. What I'm saying, they've been around for over 80 years and have been in this space doing things of this nature for a long time.
What space, doing things of what nature? Because that wasn't the impression I got from looking at their website. And I looked for other articles about the procurement process or the RFP process. I couldn't find very much. So
maybe it's also because before they were TransCore, they were part of Roper Industries. So I don't know if TransCore was broken out at some point, but it's not. in 2010, I'm just reading from something I found there, some publication ranked them in the top 500 design firms. So it's not as if they haven't been out
No, I
there.
think that they hadn't worked in a big city. I think that was the issue.
Big city, and also it's not just design, it's actually keeping track with exemptions and exceptions and things about people with disabilities. It's a very complicated process. And do they have the ability to do this? But we don't know how they were picked. We don't know why they were picked. We don't know very much about them, except it's a banner headline on their website. It's a big thing for them. And to me, it seems like a lot of money, 8% of an annual budget going to an administrator. I don't know, maybe that's standard.
No, and well, I see that they were just awarded a $1.1 billion contract in New Jersey for tolling infrastructure.
Yeah, because they have
it's not as if they're a company that is not experienced in this.
You know what? A toll on a highway where everyone pays a toll and it's a question of how many axles or how many tires you have is not, to me, maybe I'm wrong, is not exactly the same thing as administering a program like this, where we have been meeting and to talk about the different aspects of it. We don't know. The problem is you and I could sit here with everybody else and speculate about their experience and about what it takes to run this program and about whether $500 million is reasonable or not. But we have no idea about any of the mechanics.
Are they doing only hardware? Or are they just doing the hardware? Or you're saying they're also doing the administration?
That's what I thought, but I didn't look at it today, so I don't remember.
Okay, so that would be good to know for next time.
To build, operate, and maintain. I don't know if they're doing.
Oh, well, that says it.
I don't know what that means in terms of administration, but I'd just say, given that this is the first congestion pricing program that will be implemented domestically, and there are only a handful that exist worldwide, you're not going to find many companies that are going to be able to highlight their experience in doing this. And
right, but we don't know how they were chosen and why they were chosen and how they compare to the two other bidders and what their experience is like. Plus, I don't recall that any other congestion pricing scheme in the world is a revenue producing one the way this one is. The others, I think, were ostensibly about congestion and the environment. And that's what happened. And that's what it was in London. It was about congestion and about the environment. And now they're finding they have to do something else. And I can't speak for Milan or Singapore or the two towns in Sweden. So I don't know. But my point was, we don't know if it's a fair price. We don't know what it encompasses. We don't know how they were chosen. We just don't know anything about them, and we don't know what their experience is. And we do know, because I've seen it too, that I've seen it on motorcycles, that they put plastic over the license plate. I think it's something that's Ed's raised, so they avoid the tolls. And how does that factor into it, and who's responsible for that aspect of it? So I just think there are a lot of questions about administration, and that we should have answers on this whole financial thing. But maybe Mohit and Judy, do you mind if we just go to Evelyn for a minute, because she is a member of the public, and then we'll come to you. And Valerie, I know you wanted to adjourn. Is that all right, Craig?
Yeah, that's fine. I'll just say one last thing, and then I'll let them speak. That TransCore, I found an article that as early as 1988, they developed the country's first high occupancy toll system in San Diego, meaning hot lanes like HOV lanes that you are told if you use it, and only for high occupancy vehicles. So that suggests to me that was in 1988, that was the technology of the future. So that tells me this company has experience in doing this. I'm not casting any judgments as to whether they were
no exemptions. I lived out there in LA. I know what those HOV lanes are like, and they're private, and there were no exemptions except for the people who took plastic dolls on them to try and which they did. But it's not the same. Maybe it's the closest, but without knowing what the two other bidders were, we just don't know. I have nothing against transport. I just don't
I
know.
hear what you're saying. I just, my opinion is that I think we are going well beyond where we should as a task force, that we should stick to policies that are affecting our community specifically.
Well, I think it does in a sense, but that's something we could talk about offline. I know people are anxious, so let's go to Evelyn and then Moet and Judy. And I'm sorry, Judy, I see Barry's
Ye-
face. My instinct is to say Barry. Go ahead, Evelyn.
Am I unmuted? I think I'm unmuted.
You are.
Yes, okay, hi. Listening to all this, it makes me really queasy because if this company thought that, oh, 60th Street is downtown, my first reaction to 60th Street being the downtown business district, I'm like, no, it's not. It's Midtown. And I started thinking about Bloomingdale's. And then I started thinking about taxis stopping in front of Bloomingdale's. And nobody would ever be able to, I mean, it goes on and on. Having said all of this company, if they're the ones that decided to do what the mess is that they've created, the unintended consequences, let's call them that, then we know who to point fingers at. The other thing is this unintended consequences in your whereases. What happened to this 60th Street, below 60th Street, due to construction on 60th Street? So a whereas could be unintended consequences with construction in the East 60s. Could you please put the line below 60th Street? I mean, that's not how you write it, and I'm not the person to say that, but I was just thinking of a way to kind of circumvent directly saying, please put the line below 60th.
You don't
And
have
anyway,
that.
that's,
I'm sorry,
What?
Evelyn. We don't have that as a resolution moving the line. The other thing is TransCore is not responsible for the legislation or for the exemptions or any of the rules. That's the Transit Mobility Review Board up in Albany that will be approved by the Triborough Bridge and Tunnel Authority. They're just doing the physical infrastructure and maybe collecting.
Okay, I misunderstood. But could there be, so 60th Street moving the line below is like, that's a non-issue, even
No,
as an unintended.
It may be raised at a later date. It's just not in the resolution
Okay.
as of this month.
Not this one. Yeah, I know. It kind of fell by the wayside. Okay, as long as maybe you can raise it again as an unintended consequences with construction on 61st Street. Right.
Thank you. Have a happy
Okay.
holiday.
Thank you very, you too.
Thank you. Moet?
Excuse me, there's no resolution right now in regards to TransCore, is there?
No.
Just wanted to check that. So, I just did my own Googling. Apparently 70% of all these electronic tolls in America are run through TransCore. So they seem to be the leader in the space, even though it's not the exact correlate for congestion pricing. But I'm kind of with Craig on this. I think that there are questions about how TransCore were picked, but I don't think I have a basis to ask those questions because there is a process here for every public agency to go to contracting, and I without other evidence would want to presume that the MTA did this right. So particularly given that the winner they picked is the national leader in this area. So just want to put that out there, but if there's no resolution, then I'm fine.
Thank you. And thank you for that information. Thank you. Judy?
Yes, I'd like to also call the question, but just make a comment. I mean, call the meeting to adjourn, but also just make a comment when we're inviting all the elected to whatever meeting it is that we're going to pick, if it's the next one or whatever specific, we should reach out to all the electeds on Long Island, Queens, Nassau, Brooklyn, Suffolk even, that are going to be affected, who are going to come into the city and pay this fee. I think we shouldn't just keep with the electeds in our district. If we're going to reach out to electeds, let's get as many electeds as we can on the at the Zoom, so that when they go to Albany and they go to vote, they know that their constituents are being affected.
That makes sense, Judy. Thank you. And
And I
just
want to wish everybody a happy holiday and good night.
thank you. I just have a question for Craig. Does anyone know, Craig, do you know Rockland County was moving to be exempt from the entire thing because they don't have a mass transit train that really goes up there? Do you know, and they were suing, I think. Do you know, or they just refused to comply with it? Do you know anything about that?
I don't know the details of it. I've heard that their objections are essentially based off of that. They have it's not that they have no mass transit. They do have a few of the New Jersey transit rail lines that are branded in Rockland County in upstate New York as Metro North that go through New Jersey to access Manhattan. So there are stations in Suffern, and then there's a Pascack Valley line that goes up to Spring Valley. It's more limited in nature than what's on the east side of the Hudson. And there are bus connections that bring people to the to east of the Hudson to Metro North stations as well.
Your point was
But overall, their viewpoint is their mass transit choices are much more limited than elsewhere, and that's why they generally oppose congestion pricing.
We could invite them too. We'll talk about all of it. So I saw Michelle. Is that all right, Craig? So I saw Michelle had seconded Judy's motion and Valerie had made it earlier. So let's just say happy holidays to everyone. Happy Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, all the stuff that Craig said, and Happy New Year too, and a better year. So thank you, everyone. Craig, always a pleasure. And
have a good night, everyone.